Go. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer and this is Matrix Mash number 28. We have survived the 21 club. Now we're on to 28. Robert Phoenix, my man, how you doing?
Good. We survived the 27 club. It's the 27 club.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're now on to 28. So technically speaking, it's the Saturn return of our show, theoretically.
Oh, so we had our silver anniversary like a few months ago. Now 27 clubs. So now we're on Saturn's return. Excellent.
Right. Wow. So this now we have to get all grown up and focused and disciplined with what we're doing.
We'll be sure to do that tonight. Everything we talk about tonight will make total sense in the actual reality.
Yeah. Whatever that is, right?
What would that be?
Yeah.
What fun would that be? So, all right, like I could literally do a Matrix Mash that was just about your 15 minutes of flame all day, every day, right? We have so much good stuff. It's impossible to keep up with you. Like we are now on to like 3 or 4 times where I've gone to sleep, listen, and you're streaming, and I've woken up and you're streaming. Like you did some like surprise after dark podcast the other day, right? And I was like, what is this? This is like nighttime and Robert's on again. And then in the morning we were on again and you had just been on before the night before was Sunday night. And I was just like, Robert's just like, you're Tim Pool, dude.
Well, yeah, I'm Tim Pool without his pool of resources. But Monday night was kind of, it was like once in a blue moon. It was the eclipse.
Yeah.
It was also the day that the Electoral College did its thing, whatever its thing was. And so I thought it would be helpful in some ways to have a place to kind of congregate and gather and talk. And, I think I spent about a quarter of that show, like talking about my psychedelic experiences and stuff like that, more like after dark things.
Yeah.
So it was fun. And I was actually at the gym and I got a phone call. I got a text from somebody and they said, what time are you doing your show? And I oh shit, I told people I'd come back on tonight. So I said, okay, I got to go back. So I was just ending my workout, and I literally went from my workout like into the show, and I didn't really have anything scripted, but I knew we were going to talk about the Electoral College stuff and try to track it a little bit. But mostly it was just an opportunity to have some, tension release and pressure release.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, Robert's streaming again. Something must be going on. So I get on and you're trying to sort out sound issues with Frank on the StreamYard or whatever. And then I did hear a good portion of your psychedelic experience in Oakland. And, it was cute because like you referred to your mushroom trip as a rolling, which is what we used to refer to as ecstasy. So I was having to explain the difference between tripping and rolling and all of this stuff to
well, it's kind of funny because I have to be conscious of the fact that I have a 17-year-old son out there, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have to use my language.
Yeah.
And so I thought that maybe tripping might have been too obvious or something. So rolling just popped into my head. Yeah, rolling is an E thing.
Rolling is an E thing, right?
It is definitely an E thing. But that was the best way that I could describe it. But yeah, those were very interesting. It was about my first girlfriend.
Yeah.
Like my first serious girlfriend. And we met at the College of San Mateo, I was going to junior college. And it's actually a really beautiful campus, and it sits on top of a hill and overlooks the Bay Area. It's fantastic. So one day I was out there, it was a really nice day, and I was with my buddy, and we were on the lawn, just on the outside of the library. And of course, we were doing college age things on that lawn. And this very cool young gal wants to do this college age thing with us, right? And I'm like, wow, she's pretty cool. And she was cute. And so I got her number. And it's kind of interesting because I think the very first date that we had, she was the one that busted out the fungus. That was our very first date. And I'm like, wow, you are really cool. And God, where were we? We went, I think, to go see some music or something in San Francisco. Because I remember it was really difficult finding the car afterwards. Those moments right?
Yeah.
And then somehow miraculously you find the car.
It just appears out of nowhere, right? Like, you're totally lost and you're like, oh, like you look over and it's like right there, but it wasn't there a minute before. Yeah, I know.
So that was, I mean, that dates was sort of the theme, I think, in a lot of ways of our relationship. And it was, I have to say, it was in some ways it was a really great relationship.
Yeah.
Because it was like my first real. I was a late bloomer, so I had a lot of things to catch up on, a lot of time to catch up on, and she was like very cool, right?
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of adventures, and she was an Aries, so she was game for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And but we were very different in our musical tastes. So when I met her, she was really into Dan Fogelberg and Jackson Brown and the Eagles and the whole singer-songwriter thing.
Right.
And she had a bit of a, kind of a crunchy, 70s hippie girl, although she wasn't a hippie.
Yeah.
And I was totally into like, punk rock and new wave, and I would go to places that were kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So when she first got introduced to that world, she was not into it. Like, it was really alien to her.
Yeah.
But by the time we broke up, she'd gone through this amazing change. Both stylistically, she was totally dressy new wave. She had like a new wave punky haircut, and she started to spend a lot of time with this woman. And I'm like, man, she is spending a lot of time with this woman.
Yeah.
And what did I say to her? I think one time I said, are you seeing so-and-so? Right? I asked her straight up. I said, are you seeing so-and-so? And she said, no, we're just good friends. I'm like, okay. So eventually, she plays a really huge part in my life. Like, she's a very pivotal person for me, because there's this one night where I think it was her celebration for her 21st birthday or 22nd birthday. I forget which. I think it might have been 21st. I think it was 20 at the time. And so that must have been in April. And that was probably in 1981, I think. It was 1981. She was born in 1959. So it's like her big birthday weekend. And they're going to have a big party at her place out on like near the Pacific Coast Highway in San Francisco. So I decided to start the party a little early. I decided to start the party on Friday night. And I was hanging out with my friends. And I think I probably demolished about, I don't know, 3/4 of a bottle of scotch or something. And so I was pretty woozy. And I'd had a kind of an unspoken ritual of paying late night visits to her, right? And really it started when she was living at home in Pacifica. And I lived in Foster City at the time. If you're not familiar with that, that's probably about, I don't know, maybe 10 miles away.
Okay.
And there was this one night, it was during the gas shortage. And I just, I really wanted to go see her. So I got on my bike and I rode 10 miles to go see her at night. And to get there, to go through Pacifica, you have to go through this place called Sharp Park. It's really dark and really dangerous. And then she lived on the other side of this kind of really big hill. So like, this was a commitment to get to her place. Serious commitment. And I got there.
You're a man on a mission. You were a heat-seeking missile.
So I knocked on her window, and she lived like, so her bedroom was below, like on the bottom of that. It's almost like a bedroom that was beneath the living room and stairs and stuff.
Yeah.
So the window was like below me. So
yeah.
I knock on her window, and she opens the window, right? So, I climb in. And she's living at home. And her father was from Panama. And he was like this really intense Latino macho guy, really intense guy. He was a good guy. But if he had found out that I was like in his daughter's bedroom at that time, he would have killed me. I swear to God, he would have killed me. And at the same time, that's kind of an aphrodisiac, you know, to know that the father upstairs could kill me, right? And so that's a whole other thing. So anyway, I had this pattern, and so it's this night. So I decided, shit, I'm gonna go pay her a visit. So it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm driving to San Francisco from San Mateo, and I pass out at the wheel of my car, and I hit the center divider in the freeway, almost by Candlestick Park, but I bounce off of it. So I keep going. I get to her place. I think it's about 3:30 in the morning, almost 4. She lets me in, and she's not happy to see me. Right? I don't blame her. So I go in, go to sleep. The next day, I get a little cold shoulder, but
the next day is her birthday party.
That's right. Next day, so I take off. I go and make one of my like famous mixtapes, and she's running around the party, and she's being very, very social, Miss Social Butterfly. She's taking trips to the bathroom with people, and back in the 80s, you know what that meant.
Right.
Okay. So I, along with a friend of mine, somehow these things magically would find me, decide that we're going to take a little, you know, Tim Leary trip that night.
Yeah.
So we do that, and everything is great. Everything is cool. So I'm having a great time. The mixtape is on. Heroes by David Bowie's playing. I'm like, man, I'm into this thing, right? And then she says to me, I almost broke up with you today. And that hit this primal chord in me of like, you know, I lost it. It was like, oh shit, right? I totally lost it. And if I was just drunk, I would have said, oh, gee, you got great, baby. I'm glad you did, you know, but now I'm like, I'm really, it's hitting.
Super analysis.
Oh my God. It just gets into my abandonment. Oh my God, I'm gonna be abandoned, right? So I decided that I wanted to have privacy with her. And in my mind, I wanted the party to end, and I cleared that room out in about 10 minutes. Like all of a sudden, everybody leaves. But then it gets really intense because I start to freak out. I go through a real freak out. And the more I think that this is like my first girlfriend, right? And she's going to leave me, the more I'm like getting into this drama in my head to, you know, make a case that she shouldn't.
Right.
Right. And the more that I do that, of course,
on acid, that's the best time in the world to do this.
So, and the more that I do that, of course, she's like, God, I got to get the fuck away from this guy. Right. Yeah. So we go to sleep, and again, it's around 3:30 in the morning, and I can't sleep. And she's offering me absolutely zero comfort at this point.
Right.
So, and I start to really go down. I go down the elevator, right? I'm in the down elevator, like what Prince is talking about. And I go to hell. So I wind up in existential hell. And I begin to see, it was almost like I was having a life review.
Yeah.
At that time. And I was just seeing my life and how I was always coming up short and not living up to certain things. It was really difficult to, you know, really look at my life that way. But it was true. And then I prayed to God. I said, God, you know, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Just please, you know, help me out here. Help me out. I need peace. I need rest. I'll do anything. And within 5 minutes, I was asleep.
Yeah.
And then I woke up the next day, and then I realized that my life had changed. I didn't know how, but I realized that my life had changed. And I spent most of that day actually hanging out on the Sutro Cliffs, which is like Tartarian remains as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And that's where I spent most of that day. Just trying to like put everything back together, you know. And then I was living at home at the time. So now I had to tell my parents that I'd gotten into a car wreck. And I wasn't going to tell them any of the other stuff because they didn't really know about it. But I did tell them, and they were like surprisingly cool about everything. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. So then I had this, I'd known this guy, met this guy. He was like kind of like my first spiritual teacher. He would give me books, read Edgar Cayce, stuff like that. And so one day before, it was at this apartment complex job that I had. And he gave me this book called My Peace by the Lord himself. It was white, gold embossed letters. When he gave me that book, I'm like, gee, I'm not sure I'm ready for this thing. So I put it up on my bookshelf. And after I'd gone through this weekend, I said, it's time for that book. So I began to read this book, and like incredible things really started to happen. Really incredible things. It was like the words on the book were like jumping, they were like written on my soul.
Yeah.
And the more that I read the book, the more that I changed. And it was really a very profound experience.
Yeah.
So something was really in motion at that point in time. And I was going through some very deep spiritual healing. Like I was really in God's hands.
Yeah.
And that's when, and that is when a lot of phenomena started to occur in my life.
Yep.
And seeing auras and astral projection, and a lot of stuff was going on then. So so going back to my girlfriend, she told me, she said, come by Monday and I'll let you know what my decision is. I'm like, okay. So I go to her place, I open the door, and I see all my stuff piled together. Right? Like, I know what the decision is. We don't really have to spend too much longer here. And so, I listened to her, and she said that, I'm in love with so-and-so, which is
the woman.
The woman.
Right.
And I'm like, and it's like, it hit me in a way like, well, it's a she, but not a he. So it wasn't like.
Better than being left for another he, yeah.
But then it was like, she might be a better he than me. It got kind of weird a little bit. But I let it go. It's like, okay, you're happy, whatever. So I left. And so I went through this real evolution.
Yeah.
Like, man, I'm like light speed stuff. And I think it was about maybe 5 or 6 months later, she calls me and she wants to get back together. And that was a really tough decision for me, because it's like, I can't do that. I'm in a different place.
Yeah.
And as much as I would like to do that, I can't. So we would always have these moments though where we would somehow run into each other. It was really, really weird. Really, really weird. So one time I'd been traveling around the country doing tarot, and I was kind of living in my van trying to figure out where I was going to go. And I was doing my laundry on what was it, like out by Irving Street in San Francisco. And I'm doing my laundry, and then all of a sudden I see her sister, and her brother, and they walk by. And I pop out and I go, hey, Maria. I probably shouldn't say her name, but I said, hey. And so she goes, hey, blah, blah, blah. And she looked good, sister looked good, brother, cool guy. She found out what I was doing, and she said, well, why don't you come by my place and do a tarot reading for me? I said, okay, cool, I'll do that. So I went to her place. I think it was maybe about 3 weeks later, and I sat down with her, and I did this. I used to do these spreads where they were these 12 card spreads, with each card representing an astrological house, and then another card in the middle. And I would look at the angles of the cards and stuff and begin to kind of read that thing. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm going, God, there is something going on with her father. There is something. And I told her, I said, I really feel like you should, get square with your dad. Like, get square with your dad. Just make sure everything's cool with him. Okay. Now, by this time, she's fully out. And remember, her dad is this really macho Latino guy, and he has this out daughter. And that was, I think, a really challenging thing for him. So I just kept stressing that she needed to be, whatever, just get clear with your dad. And then, because I saw potentially what could happen to her father.
Yeah.
And when you see stuff like that, you gotta be really, really careful. So I got a call from her probably about 6 weeks later, when she told me her father had died.
Yeah.
And she said, you knew, didn't you? I said, actually, I did. I saw, something very intense going on with him. And her story is about his passing is actually pretty interesting, and also kind of oddly tragic in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So he had just retired from his job, and he loved his wife dearly. and and his wife and her mom was lovely person, beautiful, beautiful woman, inside and out. And they had just gone to their favorite Chinese restaurant, which I'd gone to with them before at different points in time. So they were going down the elevator, and he had this moment of just love and exuding love and happiness, and telling his family how much he loved them and how much he looked forward to traveling with his wife. And then he passed away that night.
Wow.
Like, yeah, he had a heart attack and died in his sleep. And it was like a really interesting, I think, moment. Like, he came to this kind of moment of perfection.
Yep.
And that was it, right? It was like, you got it. You got it. So he left on a high note. He
Yeah.
left on a really high note. And then there was one other time that I ran into her, and this time was probably the most surreal. Like, it was kind of really surreal. So I'm living in Berkeley, and I just had this, like, injured my back playing basketball, and I was taking Percodan, which I can't really take. It makes me sick. So I'm at this coffee place. It's called Peaberry's, I think, in Oakland. And I'm there, and all of a sudden, who shows up but her, right? And by this time, she's got short silver hair. She's married, and she's married to this, like, kind of very intense Mohawky African American woman, right? Like, so it's like, it's like these weird chapters. And I'm talking to her, and I think my kid was there, and she goes, "Oh, cool. Well, I've got a daughter too," but I'm feeling really, really woozy and sick to my stomach.
Right.
So I'm trying to, like, have this conversation with her and try to catch up with her, but like, she changed, like, really, like, intensely physically, not in a bad way. And so I literally went from talking with her to the curb, and I threw up on the curb.
Oh, geez.
Because of the Percodan.
Yeah.
And that was the last time I saw her. That was, I think, around 2000 and maybe 7, I think. So, but she was a really pivotal person in my life. And if I hadn't had that experience with her,
Yeah.
you and I probably wouldn't be talking today.
Yeah. It's interesting how, like, in very different ways, like, psychedelics can really have that transformative, like, we all understand, okay, we hear about the transformative powers of it, but, like, what you're talking about, what happened to you that night, like, one of the things with acid is more so than mushrooms or some of the others, is it's extremely analytical, extremely psychoanalytical, right? And if you're in a fairly neutral or positive place, then it's kind of cool because you're getting a chance to sort of, like, see, like, sort of observe yourself, and then observe yourself observing yourself, right? But if you come into that trip from an emotional place, or if something emotional happens while you're doing that, then suddenly you can end up in that space that you're sort of talking about, where, like, the analysis is not neutral, right? Like, it's coming from, like you just see all this stuff and you have to fix it and sort it out. Now I've seen people have that sort of thing happen. But what you're talking about in terms of, like, you had an experience with God while you were in that psychedelic state that was kind of, like, undeniable, not only at that moment for you as you were able to find some peace and fall asleep, but nothing was ever the same after that, right?
That's right.
Like,
Nothing
things
was
started
ever
to unfold in a different way. I had I was back and forth between agnostic and atheist for most of my life. And shortly after my stepbrother had died, sort of very unexpectedly and in an awful way, I had this very weird experience. It was actually at Coachella, right? Which is not, you wouldn't think of that as a place where you were going to have a spiritual experience necessarily, except for it's out in the desert, right? And people have been going to the desert and doing psychedelics for years. But, I ate some mushrooms, and it was really hot outside. And I had this moment where, like, I felt like I was going to die, like, for a second. I thought maybe I had taken too much, but I don't think it was that. It was just, it was really hot. You know what I mean? Maybe I hadn't had enough water. And like, I was really kind of scared, but, like, I also wasn't going to tell anybody. And I had this really crazy experience with the music and the audience that, like, everything started folding in on itself in terms of, like, wherever I was at in my head, like the music would match it, like, right? Like I was really stuck in this thing about my brother, and then like the Carl Cox was playing, and he was playing this track about called the murderer, right? And it was like playing into the things that I was thinking, because my brother had been shot in the head, you know. It was weird. This whole thing became like involved in my own trip in my head. And I even took some pictures during the set, and afterwards, like it was weird. There was like a picture of my brother's face almost like superimposed on the picture. And what it was like there had been these stilt walkers with umbrellas that were part of the Lucent dossier experience in the room. Mm-hmm. But like in the motion of the shot, the way it had like sort of distorted actually looked like my brother on there. Like it was weird. So all this stuff came together, and like I had this moment of like absolute like agony and joy at the same time, like laughing and crying. And in that moment, I don't know how, for me, somehow the answer became that God was a real thing that existed, and that I was able to have all these emotions and all these things that didn't seem like reasonable, how they were connecting to create this experience for me. And ever since that day, that was like in 2006, right? Like I have not been an atheist or an agnostic. Like I'm not a religious person, right? And for me, things started to unroll from there. I started having many more of these metaphysical kinds of experiences, telepathic experiences, visionary experiences, and whatnot. And I had done psychedelics before, but it was not anything like what that experience was or what they would ever be after that. Like before, it had been more of just like a party, fun thing. And from that point on, it became a very intensely personal and spiritual thing, right? And so it's interesting how that stuff can kind of happen. And then, yeah, like once you're on that trajectory, you can't go back to some of the kinds of relationships you had before, no matter how fun or whatever they were, because you've had this drastic kind of change. So it is, it is interesting. There can be many levels of intensity. I've had psychedelic trips very close to like really significant, either during really significant transitions or very close to significant transitions in my life that I really feel were sort of connected to that, including my like eventually getting off of the hard drugs. It was precipitated by like the only really like dark or bad trip I'd ever had. You know what I mean? And that kind of led to the need for me really coming to terms with the fact that I needed to clean up my life. So it can be transitionary in a number of ways. So just to sort of loop back to sort of where we started, and then we can kind of move on from there. You're streaming these days as often as Tim Pool. So I think it's time you get Mashcast IRL. So in the new year, maybe we'll do that, because I did get approved for Super Chat and all that kind of stuff. So maybe, I don't know that we'll ever hit Tim Pool's resource pool. His last name is Pool, but I don't know, just to kind of finish that thread out. We can do some live streaming in the new year, and people can jump on and have maybe psychedelic transitionary experiences with us here on the air.
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, he's totally raking in the cash. The guy is just, yeah, he's it's really interesting watching Tim Pool. He is so anal about his,
oh my God,
his content and what YouTube may or may not do to him.
Do you like, it's weird. So first of all, like I can't listen to him when he's just talking to himself on videos anymore. He's become like developed a style that I don't like at all, but his podcast can actually be really good depending on who the guest is. Like with some guests, it's very good. But yes, like he has like this, like I guess I call it content hygiene, in the same way that like the Nazis practiced eugenics hygiene, right?
Yeah,
like because we just don't do. But I don't know why more people aren't disturbed by the fact that he seems to have a direct line to people at YouTube and Facebook and things like that, when none of the rest of us can even ever get a response if we have a question about why we've gotten a strike or why something of ours has been banned or whatnot. And so, you know, like I think Tim Pool does a great job at some stuff. Like I still think he was great, absolutely manhandling Vijaya and Jack Dorsey when they were on Joe Rogan together and stuff like that. But I still think he creates cognitive dissonance in the way he presents information. He'll say something like that, like, this election is over, but maybe Trump still has a chance, right? Like what are you doing? Right? Like either the election is over or Trump still has a chance, but you like, you know what I mean? Like I don't care either way, but like he does this with everything. Like everything he says, and then says it's ridiculous when people do that. The very next sentence, he does the thing that he just said was ridiculous. And then what you're talking about, like when someone who is presenting himself at this point as like really one of the arbiters of like, I don't know if he'd call himself an arbiter of truth, but an arbiter of like rational perception of what's going on, for that person to be that so paranoid about like the way words are said, right? Like to say he's for free speech and then be willing to give in to that many like levels of like having to watch what he say and smack the guests. I mean, I've heard him say to people like, don't say that, don't say that.
No, he's constantly on alert as to what may or may not get in between him and his income stream with YouTube.
I do think he's a very good businessman. I think he knows what he's doing in terms of like being able to represent himself so that he doesn't get screwed in terms of like, you know, contracts and things like that. But I don't think he's particularly intelligent or bright or has a unique insight on very many things. I do like, it is weird to me. Like, I think he's okay, right? But it is crazy, the income that he's making right now. Like, I'll sit there and watch people just drop $300 bomb after $300 bomb when like he's literally just said something that Alex Jones said in 2001.
Right. I actually think Tim is intelligent. I do think he's intelligent. I'm not sure, like he really got on the Trump train.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was like a conscious deal that was being made.
Yeah.
And he was going to play the role of Alex Jones in 2020,
mm-hmm.
and really try to get into the kind of millennial sort of Zoomer crossover. I guess you might call that evolving. I don't know. He became a bit more libertarian, I think, during that phase. But I wouldn't necessarily say that he is all that innovative or all that creative, right? No. But that doesn't mean he's not intelligent. I think he is intelligent.
I think he's intelligent, but I don't hear anything super like unique or interesting coming out of his mouth. He doesn't have like a unique insight into something other than from his experiences on the ground, right? He has walked away with like a perception that we've never heard from a lot of other people before. Right.
And he's got like his crew now.
Yeah.
And there's that one young guy, he's got kind of long hair.
I think he's like one of the main guys at Minds.
I actually like him.
Ian?
Yeah, I like him. He's actually pretty clear. And he was getting into the Federal Reserve the other day. And I thought,
he trying to smack him down, saying, nobody will understand that. Nobody will understand that. Yeah.
No, that's not true. He actually explained it in a very clear way. And I thought
that's what Tim was saying. I'm just saying Tim was trying to sort of put the kibosh on it. Yeah.
Right. And more control. I think he's a bit of a control freak.
Oh, I think he's a total control freak.
Yeah. And it's always funny when Alex Jones, lands like Godzilla in there, when that Tim just goes into pure panic mode.
Pure panic. He wants him because he wants the hits. He wants the kind of numbers that Joe Rogan gets when he has.
That's right.
Right. You can see how badly Tim Pool wants the Joe Rogan level of success, right? Yep. You can see that he wants to be the big, now that Joe Rogan is not on YouTube, he wants to rule the YouTube podcast sphere and whatever. And you can see like he's trying to do this thing where he has Jones on and it can be like shocking enough that he gets a lot of views, and he is being careful because a lot of people who've asked him to have Alex Jones on have been critical of how like Joe Rogan won't let him talk about certain things or shuts him up when he talks about certain things. So he's trying to appease that crowd and get more views that way, but is also afraid of saying a thing that will get his video taken down or will get him labeled a conspiracy theorist. So like that leaves him like a really thin walkway, right? Like, or really thin, like hat pipe to skate in if it's Tim Pool.
Yeah.
And he can't relax and just let the conversation flow. That's why he needs Michael Malice there, because Michael Malice is the lubrication. Michael Malice is great. Michael Malice can go anywhere, talk about anything. It will be intellectual. It will be funny. It will bring a smile to your face and whatever. But it would be terrible if it was just Tim and Alex, because like I can't imagine how many hemorrhoids Tim Pool has when that show's done.
Oh God, yeah. He's
right?
just. I mean, he's like thankful that he had him on the show and boost his ratings, but he's probably extremely relieved that it's over.
Extremely relieved that it's over. I don't think Tim Pool drinks, but if he ever does, it's after those shows, right? Kind of thing. But yeah, so it's interesting, this space that he's carved out. But I actually think you're far more interesting to listen to. So
well, I mean, thanks. I'm a lot older than Tim, and I came from a different time and place than he did, and so what I think I would want to talk about, I think at times he would find frightening, actually.
Yeah, I think Tim Pool needs to be frightened.
Yeah.
So Laura just recommended, I don't think we should do it today, but maybe on our first Mashcast IRL, maybe we should look at Tim Pool's chart. Have you looked at Tim Pool's chart yet?
I don't even know when he's born. Maybe your associate producer there, or executive producer.
Our associate, she's our associate producer tonight, right? So you get one right now too. 3/9/1986, March 9th, 1986.
She's awesome.
She can do. What else would you like to know? She'll do some research.
So he's a Pisces, of course. He's conflict avoidant.
So maybe we can do our inaugural Mashcast IRL. Do a little spoof scene in the beginning with the beanies and a Tim Pool chart, and then move on to content that's actually interesting.
I think he's born on the same day as Yuri Gagarin, the Russian cosmonaut, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. So speaking of Alex Jones, adios, David Knight. Hasta luego.
All right. So I mean, here, like, David Knight came on to Alex Jones like really during the last year I ever listened to him. So like 7 or 8 years ago, right? That I ever listened closely. I would still catch clips in order to be able to talk about stuff and whatever. But my impression of David Knight, because I watched him probably almost every day for a year or so, and then I would see him once in a while. He's the only person that has maintained his integrity through all the iterations and transitions that Jones has gone through during the period of time that he worked there. The others who maintained integrity were all sacked a long time ago, right? They sacked Aaron and Melissa. They sacked Shikari, right? Because that was a good crew that he got in there that wasn't going to say the crazy shit he wanted them to start doing. And I think with David, because David was so clean in his presentation and just very libertarian, like he didn't go too far off into conspiratorial territory that Melissa and Aaron did. Melissa and Aaron are great, by the way. Like they've really taken well to going off the Alex Jones reservation and become much more like weird and out there with some of their research and stuff like that. But David always pretty much walked the line. He would never really say anything he couldn't prove, and he was a libertarian. And everything he ever presented he never supported, he never got into this, well, maybe Trump would be better. No, he never did any of that shit, right? And he also, for me, like the straight libertarianism is a little bit boring. I think, I don't care as much about like money and entrepreneurship and things like that as, straight up and down libertarians do. But David Knight is an honest stand-up guy. There's no question in my mind that he was not working for anybody, like he was not compromised or willing to say things that he didn't really believe just to have a bigger audience or to any of that kind of stuff. And so it was one of those things that it actually made Alex look good to keep him around. It made him look like he hadn't completely been totally bought.
Yeah.
But at a certain point when he just wouldn't bend on certain issues, and on top of that was probably presenting some things that Alex had been told was a no-no, right? Like certain aspects of reporting on the virus and certain aspects of reporting on Trump stuff and, election nonsense and whatever. Like at a certain point, you can't exist in lie and in truth anymore. Right. And so he had to dump him. I haven't heard anything else. Apparently he alerted people by his Twitter.
Yeah, he just said I was just sacked by Alex Jones, or I was just fired by Alex Jones.
Yeah, he said fired. He didn't say my contract has come to an end or anything.
He was fired. And the one thing that he has said is that he is a libertarian, and he's really a constitutionalist.
Yeah.
That's what David Knight is.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. Yeah.
And he's clarified that. And he and Alex, I think, are probably on the same page with the virus and the kind of the madness with it. Where they depart is number one, David Knight is not a Steve Pieczenik fan. That's pretty clear.
Yep.
And I think he has openly mocked Steve Pieczenik about the watermarks and all that stuff that Steve Pieczenik was touting on the ballots.
Yeah, whatever happened to that, Steve Pieczenik?
And Steve Pieczenik was making some very bold claims about what was going to happen and how Trump was going to win, and he was in one of his Tommy Bahama shirts and laughing and carrying on and being very confident. And Alex was like, are you pretty sure about this, Steve? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't know. Are you sure? And he was just like, he didn't have a care in the world. And Steve Pieczenik doesn't have a care in the world because he wins either way. It doesn't really matter who he wins either way.
Well, this is a guy who's acknowledged that he was paid to do psychological operations in countries all over the world. So why would we not think he's doing the same thing to Alex Jones's audience?
Yeah, I mean, they hired him to be involved with Iran Contra, and you know that he was on the side of the Contras, right? Who were, the so-called resistance that was being paid for and funded by cocaine money.
Yep, that's the whole connection to the freeway Ricky Ross and bringing crack into, there's a whole, I mean, literally, like so much of what we understand today as like the going to like the private prison system and all of this kind of crap we're dealing with today was the genesis was that point.
Yep. So he was not supportive, let's say, of Steve Pieczenik. And the other person he was not supportive of was Donald Trump. And he was adamant about Trump's failure to squash the COVID vaccine, squash the COVID pandemic, period.
Yeah. And
not only that, but to repeal the emergency orders.
So he talked about that same thing you talk about. I don't know because I don't listen. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, he was very clear about that stuff, and he brought that up pretty consistently. And so I think somewhere between that and the no love lost for Steve Pieczenik, I think that was the end of the line for David. I also think it's the end of the line for InfoWars.
Yep.
I think InfoWars is going to go away. Alex Jones talked about it when he was on Joe Rogan.
Oh, what did he say?
He was telling Rogan that he's not sure he might be able to do this much longer.
Yeah.
That his body's not holding up. I mean, you look at him; he looks like hell.
Terrible.
He looks like hell. He's younger than me, and he looks older than me. I'm sorry. So he's hinting that he's gonna kind of pack it in, like that's what he's been saying.
I think Operation InfoWars, or what, I mean, he's come full circle, right? He's gone from like how he became famous was for warning about martial law, and now he's proposing martial law or pushing martial law. So he's come full circle. He's taken people right out to like a far edge and then brought them right back into the system. He's done his work. I think he'll retire in luxury for a job well done in creating a level of helplessness and cognitive dissonance in a group of people that, really could have been deeply awakened, right? And a few people did go, a small portion of the people who've ever watched Alex Jones have gone on to be deeply awakened. And most of them are got folded back into the system, either with the Trump kind of stuff, or, some other kind of thing, or, just touting nonsense, right? That the Republicans are better than the Democrats, that like America is better than other places, and da 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 da. And my point isn't to say whether they are or they're not, but like the point of so much of this had been like the whole system is corrupt, right? That like part of the reason that there has been like so many things being done to us at home is because they were done abroad and we didn't do anything about it. And so, right. So all the lessons we learned seem to have then been like, we learned some things from Alex Jones and then it was like unlearned. Right. And so you have people like, I don't understand how people who like, were patriots when they started listening to Alex in the late 90s are still touting some of that same, I believe in the United States. I'm a patriot. I'm a constitutionalist and shit. All that shit has proven to be bunk, to be a failure. Right. And I feel like he did a huge bit of damage and disservice. And for that, he has been handsomely rewarded and his job is done. And so now he'll probably be able to retire, and either we'll never hear from him again, or he'll have like a comedy podcast where he can be funny because he's funny.
He is funny, but he over the last few months, he's lost his sense of humor.
Yeah, for the very reason that, you know, it's going to come.
But he is very funny. And he was, you know, they took it to the road again in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. And the Supreme Court had already kind of taken the wind out of their sails by ruling on Friday. So when all those people hit Washington, D.C. on Saturday, it was very different than when they were there. Right, what was it? The Friday, Saturday when Mars went direct. What was it, about 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
You know, that the energy for that event was like real. I watched some of that. Man, it was really up, and it was like, wow, these people they're operating at a fairly high vibratory level.
Yeah.
They're kind. They believe in these ideals. The energy this past weekend was very different. It was really, it was like what I would describe it as impotent rage. Like that's what was going on. And then what happened is at night, of course, you know, the dumbass Antifas who think that they could go in after dark and start picking people off in an event like that. There were things happening on Saturday, this last Saturday, I've never seen before.
The stabbing the Proud Boys and stuff like that.
Well, there's that's gone on.
Okay.
That's gone on. But I saw a level of violence against this one Antifa guy that I've never seen before coming from the other side.
So, I mean, so from the Trump side, they were being violent towards.
Yeah, but this guy had instigated something, right? Of course, he was a dumbass, and he was instigating something. I forget what he did. He was with his comrade chick, and you were dealing with a bunch of really pissed off people that were looking for the slightest provocation.
Yeah.
The slightest provocation to take out their frustration. And this guy received a royal ass whooping from multiple people. Like, it was ugly. And then I gotta hand it to the girl. She went in there and she was trying to stand up for her guy and pull him out and for a while they left her alone. They just move her aside, like, we don't want to deal with you. And then all of a sudden, even that snapped. Wow. And they put the whoop ass on her. It really made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To watch it. And I said this before, you know, I have a little schadenfreude. And, you know, I don't mind seeing somebody who's been a real punk or a bully, you know, get it handed to him. I don't have a problem with that at all. But this was beyond that. This was almost like, you know, the scene in Platoon where they take their frustrations out on that Vietnamese village because Manny got killed, right? Yeah. That's what it was like. It was like Barnes leading the retribution party. Yeah. And there's really dark stuff happening now. And today, Trump put out a tweet that was kind of scary. It was like, I think one of the scariest tweets he's ever.
What did he say?
Well, he was talking about how great the market was, that it was at an all-time high. And then he said something to the effect of, don't forget to get those shots. Right?
Huh.
And it's like, you mean vaccinated? Or are you talking about different kinds of shots? Like, is there some kind of programming going on now?
Right.
With the tweets? And it's like, are they like priming the pump to get all these angry, pissed off people who know the vote was stolen? Totally.
Well, remember when he said a while back to the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by? And then all of a sudden we have like this, whatever's going on this weekend with the, you know, Proud Boys stealing some banner and then whatever, and some just different behavior than, I mean, I don't pay as close of attention to it as you have, but yeah, like it does seem like something could possibly be being activated through what he's doing.
Yeah, so I think we're at a really, really dangerous place, right? I mean, because people are looking to people like Michael Flynn, and Lin Wood, and you know, and in Lin Wood, though, I used to think Lin Wood was good because he stepped up for Richard Jewell,
Right.
took care of Nick Sandman, working for Kyle Rittenhouse. So it's like, but he also has some like weird clients in his background.
Mm-hmm.
He was legal counsel for the Ramseys, John Benet Ramsey, and the parents, right? So the parents.
He is. I mean, like it's entirely possible he's hooked in with some of this sort of MK Ultra kind of.
It could very well be. I mean,
being the lawyers for the patsies and shit like that.
He had another client, I forget who it was, but it was somebody really sketchy. So, and he's been really volatile on Twitter, and I find it fascinating that Jack Dorsey and Twitter have not done anything with his tweets.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like they let him, basically start flames on Twitter, and they're not doing anything about that. So he's got that going on. Trump's saying, "Oh, don't forget to get your shots." Right.
I saw somebody talking about how in some clip Donald Trump didn't refer to the vaccines or the shots as Pfizer shots, but as Fisa shots.
He did. Right? He said Fisa. And Trump does things like this.
Yeah.
There's a picture of him at the recent Army Navy game, like this last weekend, and he's in the stands, and he's looking at the field, and there are cadets in front of him. They're all standing up, and there's a space, like each space on the bench has a number, which is supposed to be like a seat,
right?
And the number in the space was 17. 17 is the numerical value of Q. Right? So, like, how does this happen? What's going on here, right? Okay. And today is the 17th, by the way. So everybody's looking at the 17th. 17. So there are things that clearly are being front-loaded, whether they're staged or there's a weird.
They're certainly being managed. Yeah.
It was like, and people who are into this stuff like notice it. I'm not really into that, but I notice people that notice it.
So what do you think about, like, how do you feel about all of these people who are just constantly like, well, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. There's another chance. Maybe this is going to happen, like pushing for the idea of martial law. I mean, I know you've talked about the circumstance under which you would have been a proponent of martial law. I'm never for martial law, but I understand the rationale and the logic behind what you said about that. But these people who are like, Flynn's going to save us. This is going to save us. Oh, there's another shot. Oh, the Patriots are going to do it this weekend. Today's the day. Next weekend's the day. It's just like at a certain point, how is this any different than like the Russiagate nonsense that we didn't right? Like that kind of stuff. Because the blaming the election loss on the Putin started days after the Hillary lost. Like at what point is like the other side doing another version of the same thing?
Well, I'm not. Yeah, so it's a really good question. That gets into the Q material too,
right?
Which is always something's going to happen. And then there would be these symbolic tells.
Trust the plan. Don't do anything now. It'll happen later.
But there'd be these symbolic tells, which would be some interpreted as affirmation.
Yeah.
And so people would continue to invest in it and feel like they were being given the inside skinny or the inside baseball on something, which is very seductive. But I think there's some of that involved right now. And by the way, the only reason I would have used martial law was right at the beginning of the COVID shit, I just would have shut it down.
Right.
Period. End of story. I just like, fuck it. I'm shutting this shit down right now. I know what's up. You guys are fucking with me. This is another fuck with me kind of moment. And we're just going to shut it down. I'm not going to let Fauci get in. I'm not going to let Birx get in. It's just going to, there's the wall. The wall's at the border. The wall's at the airports. That's it. Nobody's getting in. Oh, by the way, we're taking over the media. And we're going to deal with this and we're going to clean it up. And then you deal with, whatever kind of enemies of the state who would later pop up through Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They know who they are. They probably have records. They probably have backgrounds. You just deal with them. So that doesn't happen.
Do you trust that Trump would ever have given up that power once he seized it? Like, that's the problem with martial law.
Well, he gave it away. I mean, he gave away the power.
Right.
Like, he gave away the power. He gave when he made those orders on March 13th and April 13th. Number one, I think on March 13th, he turned it over to FEMA. So supposedly FEMA's
right. But if, let's say he had declared martial law, shut the borders down and seized the media, do you think that he really would have ever been like, now I'm going to give the media back and now I'm going to reopen the borders? Like, I've never heard, with the exception of this time, which is to me, because I think Trump is a lord of chaos, like you said, and in that way he's different. But I think he's just a tool of.
No, he probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
To be honest, but and this is not an endorsement for Trump, by the way.
Right.
It's not an endorsement for Trump, but let's take a look at this idea that presidents have checks and balances. They really don't. I mean, they don't have checks and balances because it's a uniparty.
Hi, Jasper, by the way.
The uniparty has goals in mind, right? The uniparty circumvents the checks and balances. So theoretically, we have these presidents who are only there for 8 years, but there's always some kind of a continuity continuum with them, right?
Yep.
So we're given this, like somebody asked me about this one time. So we're given this idea of this kind of false representation that it's part of a democratic process, checks and balances, whatever, right? And what has that led to? It's led to a ton of corruption and closet tyranny, closet tyranny.
Yeah.
Right. So in a weird way, I would rather have an open tyrant.
Yeah.
Right? I would rather have an open tyrant, and I would actually rather have somebody who would be, and I know this sounds just completely and utterly sacrilegious, but I would actually rather have somebody like a really enlightened king, to be honest with you. Like, I think that's a better deal.
I actually know a lot of people who agree with you. Like, for me, I'm a sort of voluntarist type, sort of through and through, but I know a lot of people who believe in monarchy. They believe,
I mean, if that's where we're going to go with that form of governance, like, you know, I'm like, I think there's much more interesting things to accomplish as humans.
Yeah.
Than that. But if we're going to stay in that realm, I'd rather have one person who's totally accountable and gets shit done and isn't this closet tyranny in this fake kind of play that they roll out all the time.
Right.
So that we think we're involved in some democratic process that you know is part
there's no democracy. There's
bullshit.
It's bullshit. I mean, there's never, I don't think, at least certainly not in our lifetimes, but probably in our parents' lifetime either, there has been no administration that rolled back tyranny, that loosened up freedoms and gave back freedoms that had been infringed on or taken away. That has never happened.
Right. That's true. That's absolutely true.
It's always been a steady march in one direction. It might be like, so for example, you had Clinton do an assault weapons ban, right? That then was undid, but the person who undid it also gave us the Patriot Act, right? So sum total, the tyranny marched forward many more steps, even though there was a token little, because at that point they didn't want people rebelling, right? So they'll give you a little token, like some little dumb shit, like of a $1,200 check, or, you know, now we won't punish you if we catch you with a big magazine, where, you know, whatever the fuck it is, some really small little snack, right? Some little treat, right? Because you've been good or something like that. But no, there's been no administration that rolled back the tyranny created by the prior administration. Obama did not repeal the Patriot Act, neither did Trump, neither will Biden, neither will the person who comes out after that. Tyrants don't give up power once they seize it.
That's right. And the NDAA is always rubber stamped and renewed. So yeah, I mean, at that point, what does it really matter? You know, so just go ahead and do it. Like, be the guy.
Yeah.
And at least we know that you're the guy and you're the one that's responsible for it, versus this kind of cloud of Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and all this, you know, drama in theater. Like, in a lot of ways, the last like, I think there are some interesting things that have happened the last 4 years, and there is an awakening going on. But the last 4 years, governmentally in Washington, complete and utter waste of time. Just a waste of time.
Yep.
Waste of people's attention. Waste of theoretical taxpayer dollars. I mean, just a total waste of time.
What do you think about Tulsi Gabbard going scorched earth in her last few weeks?
That's really interesting. Like, Tulsi Gabbard wants to repeal the Patriot Act.
She's going, the things she has said in the last few weeks were previous Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and whatever. Put forward a thing for no more transgender women in women's sports. No, if a baby survives abortion, it needs to be cared for, right? And so no more partial birth abortions and all that kind of stuff. Repeal the Patriot Act. Which was, to me, the repeal of the Patriot Act part was really interesting, because one of my big criticisms of her has been her belief in the narrative we've been sold about Al Qaeda and Taliban terrorism and ISIS and all that kind. She's still a military person, and so the repeal, this repeal of the Patriot Act thing, to me seems a step into territory she has not gone before. She was always like, well, I'm anti-regime change war, but I am for fighting ISIS and fighting Al Qaeda and stuff like that. Repealing the Patriot Act, to me, that's a little bit of a new territory. Going scorched earth, hasn't run. Didn't run again for her seat. So it's kind of like, what does she have planned next? But I just was curious about your thoughts on. I mean,
it's really interesting. Did she say she wanted to repeal Section 230 as well?
Yes, that was the other one. I think she had 5 or 6 things. Yeah.
It's like, well, why can't she be president, right? I mean, at this point, it all sounds really.
I told you, we saw the huge Tulsi Gabbard billboard in the cornfield in Iowa. I thought maybe we had stepped through into another reality, which I guess maybe that can be where we go to next. Are we in the same reality all the time? But this cornfield in Iowa surely seemed to believe that Tulsi Gabbard was going to be the president.
That's interesting. And that's the Field of Dreams, right?
Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. This was the biggest billboard I have ever seen in my life. It had to be expensive.
That's interesting. So she's an Aries, and she, like Mars, has been going. She's got a lot of Aries in her chart. So
she's been getting 4 things, right? She has like 3 or 4 planets.
She's been getting a lot of Mars action to her her Aries planets. So this kind of aggression, this really forward movement, I think is probably an astrological byproduct. But the other thing about Tulsi, did you see that thing? It was with Klaus Schwab and the leaders of tomorrow. Have you seen that thing?
You told me, and then I just did a little clip with John Brisson the other day too, and he was talking about it as well, how she's with Alex Soros and Dan Crenshaw and all these people on the World Economic Forum's young leaders. And of course, the Tulsi Gabbard, Dan Crenshaw ticket was Brett Weinstein's wet dream for his emergency scenario, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's not like, to me, like, I didn't like she said she would not run third party, but I think rolling over and supporting Joe Biden or endorsing Joe Biden, I wouldn't have done that if I were her. Even though I said I would have said, this is ridiculous. You can't talk. So I didn't like that. I can't give her a pass for that. Right. And then just the, the irrational belief in certain aspects of the terrorism narrative has always been a problem for me. I feel like she gave a reasonable answer for her past association with the CFR. I've never heard her answer the question about the CNP, but that's because the people who interview her would never ask her that. So there's things out there that are bothersome about her, and what you're talking about is one of them. But when you see her go scorched earth on some of this stuff, and at least, it's drawing attention to it, even if she's sort of not serious or no, whatever. But the other thing I think is interesting, and I want your thoughts on this, like I've heard you remark a couple of times about the fact that Kamala Harris still has not resigned her Senate seat, right? Yep. So it's odd that these two have been facing off against each other. Like that was really the moment, like in the preliminaries that ended Kamala's run, and somehow Kamala still ended up supposedly going to the White House, but she hasn't dropped out of the Senate, but Tulsi's dropped out of the House of Representatives, right? She didn't run again. She's resigned her seat. So Kamala Harris hasn't. So there's this interesting, opposing behavior between the two of them, like opposite kind of.
Well, they're opposite signs. Kamala Harris is a Libra and Tulsi Gabbard is an Aries. And astrologically, I was tracking that on the way to the debates, and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be good.
Yeah,
like this is going to be good because you can just see it lined up. Like she is going to absolutely pitbull Kamala Harris, and she did. She totally did. Apparently, the sign that you saw is still there from the Iowa primary. She got a bunch of them in Iowa. I just looked it up. So those signs are there, but they're still there. They haven't been taken down though.
That's it. But isn't that's I just find that interesting. We didn't see it anywhere else, right? The whole trip, we went to what, 12 different states we passed through or something. We saw tons of Trump signs and no other people's signs at all. No like leftover Yang Gang or Biden Harris or anything like that. Only Trump signs, MAGA sign kinds of things, and the Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah. So I think she did a big billboard blitz in Iowa.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that because of the economy, that there aren't many takers for those billboard spaces.
Okay.
That's what the rational part of me thinks that. So instead of like tearing them down because they don't have anybody else to advertise there, and that, this is challenging economic time, they're just going to leave them up.
Right.
But even still, I mean, that they're there now. I don't know. I do think it's interesting.
It's interesting. And I want to go into a little bit of different direction for this, but just before we do, I just kind of want to wrap up two little threads. First of all, Laura looked up Steve Pieczenik, and his birthday's 12/7/43. But did you know that he's Cuban?
Yeah, I knew he was born in Cuba.
So that's
I did know that.
Super interesting, right? So that he's Cuban American. And then the other thing is like, I think David Knight's going to be fine. I think he's going to I think he may end up finding himself on Ben Swan's new network, the ISE.media. He interviewed Mickey Willis as a new partner there, and David Knight had a really good interview with Mickey Willis a few months back and whatever. So that would be one of my ideas as to where he would end up. And I think that would probably be good for him, and he'd be able to do what he wants without being bothered by Alex. But into this next part, so remember you and I like joke back and forth because you're always like, have you ever seen this movie? And I'm like, no, I don't watch movies. Have you seen this TV show? You're like, no, I hate TV shows, right? But
I like TV. I like TV shows. The series, the mini series and stuff like that. I don't spend a lot of time with that.
So this one that we're really into right now, this Man in the High Castle, which Phillip K. Dick, I know, is by proxy a buddy of yours, right?
I think today's Phil's birthday.
Happy birthday, Phillip K. Dick. Way ahead of his time. I think he was the first person to recognize that he was a target individual, right? He's like the things he was noticing are things that like now are common conversation amongst people who think that they're being gang stalked, harassed, tracked, electronically surveilled, all that kind of stuff. And he was talking about it at a time where the technology seemingly didn't exist for that, but he already had a good grip on it. So way ahead of his time. Yep. But we're watching this, and I know you're friends with Tessa, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we're watching this Man in the High Castle, right? And one of the features of this is that there are sort of different, we're only in the third season, so I don't know exactly where it's going, but my guess is there are at least two, but possibly multiple realities, right? But the same people and all of them connected to each other's lives and doing sort of similar kinds of things, but different, similar, but different, right? Kind of thing. So various realities that can be crossed over to in various ways. Also in Fringe, you had the two universes, right? That most people like, they had built a bridge between them, and that would be the way most people would have to go if they were going, except for Olivia had other ways to travel, which in this show, there's that as well. But on the other side, you had things that were similar, but not like, so you had like a movie, the thing with the sign outside the movie theater that shows what's playing. It will say Back to the Future, but instead of being Michael J. Fox, it was Eric Stoltz, right?
Right.
Like this, when I see this field in Iowa like that, and the way it didn't look like just like a shitty billboard off the side. It was huge. And it was like right in the middle of this cornfield. It looked like something that like was being presented like out of some majestic kind of story or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, like this is weird. Like when you're in some of these places, in the middle of nowhere, like in the Midwest, and certainly like when we were traveling on the old Santa Fe Trail, it's like, are we in the same fucking reality? Did we wander off into either a different version of reality or like step into a different time space kind of thing or whatnot? And so, you know, I've really been thinking of that in terms of the Tulsi Gabbard sign. And for me, like, I don't want anyone for president, right? But like at this point, like whatever the fuck it is that we're experiencing with this, like not Biden, Trump nonsense, like almost anything would be like a welcome relief from that, right? And so an alternate reality where it went a totally different way almost sounds like, okay, at least it wouldn't be this fucking boring. I'm like, when I say boring, I don't mean like I'm bored, but like I'm tired of every day waking up and hearing, there will be another chance for another lawsuit tomorrow. There's, you know, whatever, that kind of shit, right? So
yeah, it's like Groundhog Day a
yeah,
little bit, yeah.
totally.
And I understand why people are trying to hang on to this idea that there will be a kind of quantum moment where everything flips.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I totally get it. And at the same time, you know, it's one of those things where it gets really, really dangerous because if it doesn't happen, then what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then what? Do you like move the goalposts 6 months down the road? Like, oh, well, they've got this thing going on, this investigation going on, and they're going to take Biden down. Like, is it just a continuation of the same narrative, but with different players, and they just keep people kind of hooked in that loop?
Well, that's what this has been. That's what the Q thing has been. If you remember during Obama's presidency, you'd have people thinking that like in any day or any week now, Sheriff Arpaio was going to come up with the goods about the birth certificate.
That's
And
true. That's very
remember
true.
the Mike Zollo team who was investigating all of that. And every week there was like, I forget what the name of that online newspaper was, but every week we would hear about how like, you know, Obama was going to be arrested soon. Obama was going to be removed from the White House. The Patriots were going to remove him. The Patriots within the military were, we heard this. So it's just like on and on and on and on, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, it's a theme from 1984 where they're always talking about the war that's going on. And if you really like the original version of 1984 and you listen to the newscast and you try to figure out who's fighting who and who's winning, you never really know, right? Because there are times in the newscast you think they're fighting against like Oceania or Transoceania or whatever, and then later on you find out that they're allies of Transoceania, but and it's just it's completely confusing.
Yeah.
And right, so you never know who the enemy is, but there's always a sense of we made great gains. You know, the forces made great gains today, and we hope to capture opposition leaders and all that stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that is a theme.
Thing.
It's an ongoing theme in 1984. So there's this I forget what his name is, but there's this Russian guy. I should actually probably find out for a time. Anyway, there's this Russian guy who was an actor, and he basically was hired by the Russians. And who's the one Russian that everybody doesn't like? The magician guy. What's his name? He used to be on Alex Jones a lot. He's an occultist. I forget the guy's name. Anyway, this Russian guy. I sound so unintelligent right now, but there's this Russian guy who was an actor, and they hired him to kind of reinvent propaganda, right? And so what he did is he decided that the best way to manipulate people was just to confuse the fuck out of them.
Yeah.
And like have them being hit and bombarded in all these different directions with all these different events so that they had absolutely no kind of grounding in space. And at that point, people were really, it's like beyond duality. You know, duality is kind of, if you know how to play with it and step out and away from it, it's kind of easy to deal with in some ways.
Yeah.
Or you can at times take a side or whatever, or step back. But when it's coming at you in all these different directions, it's beyond duality. So this is and I think that this stratagem has been applied to our current reality.
I think we're at a lost moment, right? Where the last message I looked at before I hopped on with you, someone I'm friends with on Facebook who I don't know personally, but obviously watches the show or listens to the show or something, is sending me a petition to sign to get President Trump to invoke martial law, right? Like, this is how lost people are right now, that they're petitioning the president to declare martial law, right? Like, how did we get here?
Well, we got here because the social contract has been broken.
Yes, but also what you're talking about, this like just absolute confuse people, putting people out there in front of people like Tim Pool, like, who, in my opinion, create a cognitive dissonance by saying one thing and then immediately saying the opposing thing that undoes what he just said next, right? Like, people's minds are scrambled, right? And they're literally people are like even forgetting lessons that we learned not that long ago, right? And they send me as evidence people who are outed as agents and propagandists and things like that, like 5, 10, 15 years ago, right? Kind of thing. Right. And so we're in that moment where like the propaganda war has been really, really, really successful in seeding a level of chaos that it's almost impossible to extract a clean string of information on anything anymore.
Yeah, and people are really spun around, and it was torturous watching Alex Jones try to make a case for martial law.
Yeah,
like he was equating what happened in 1776 as a modified version of martial law. Like, you got to be fucking kidding me, Alex.
Yeah.
This is you've lost.
He has said 1776 will commence again as one of the taglines for his show, right? Like, kind of thing. So that makes actually sense. If he is completing his circle by proposing martial law, then that has to be what 1776 was, because he promised people it would rain again.
Yeah, well, astrologically, we have Pluto in Capricorn, and it's nearing 26 degrees. And when it hits 26 degrees next year, that will be the Pluto return of the United States. And of course, that's when 1776 happened.
Commence again, right?
Yeah. So the what's interesting is that we've got at least 4 tracks of revolutionary energy happening right now simultaneously.
Okay.
We have the 1776 energy with Pluto and Capricorn and the Pluto return of the US. Right around the same time after it happens in the United States, there is a revolution going on in Paris.
Yep.
So those 2 revolutions are they're pretty almost simultaneous. There's one happens kind of after the other. Lafayette, who was a buddy of Washington's, went back to France, and he actually fled France because of the revolution. He was a Freemason, and he actually wound up going to jail. And it's probably one of the best things for him during that time, so he didn't get caught up in that revolution. So you've got the American Revolution, you have the French Revolution. Now you've got the Bolshevik Revolution, which took place in 1917. And that was really kicked off and triggered when Trump took office in 2016 and then inaugurated in 2017. That's that 100-year cycle. So we have been in the throes of a Bolshevik takeover.
Yeah.
Since then, this is a color revolution.
Yeah, and the color revolution.
It is color. There's a color revolution. The color is purple. It is undeniable, right? If you look at a lot of the COVID,
the purple
symbolism and COVID instructions, the purple.
Yeah.
Purple gloves or purple masks. So that all happened when Hillary.
Well, we're also like constantly in level purple, except for right now we're in level blue, right?
Right. But that's level purple is like the
purple. That's the one you can't get out of, right? Well, and also the purple is the one that seems to be the hardest to get out of, right? Like the people stay stuck in the purple level for a really long time. Blue only happens for short periods of time, and then people who never get to purple seem to move up to the levels where they have the least restrictions. But it's like once you're in purple, you're stuck.
Yeah. So then the other revolutionary strain is Chiron and Aries, which really hit like lightning and thunder in 1968. And that's when you have the birth of the Weather Underground.
Yeah.
And what was happening in Paris. Like in 1968, when Chiron was in Aries, Paris was on fire. And guess what? It's
Paris
on fire again.
Yeah.
So we have 4 revolutionary cycles happening simultaneously right now. And it's pretty significant. And yet, right, it's like, you know, we're not quite in that revolutionary, you know, phase, whatever that is or going to look like. But we've decoupled. Like, we are no longer the United States. This is no longer the United States. We have formally, we've decoupled because of Trump's declaration on April 13th. That's done. And then when you have 22 states basically suing the other 5 states, and then 20 other states suing the 22 states that were suing, right? That's like a civil war in some ways. And I think they've even gotten us to think about the idea of having more than one president.
Yeah.
Because we have the president-elect, and then we have Trump. And at some point in the future, we will probably have more than one president.
Yeah.
That's what I think will happen. And I would not be surprised if the United States is split up into regions. And each of these regions
like
will
when
be.
they break a company up, like if they, like kind of when they're, you know, if they say that we, you know, have to break Facebook up, if it has to split back into WhatsApp and Instagram and all that kind of stuff being on their own. No, I think that's the other thing that's good about, I want you to watch this Man in the High Castle show, because that it is in the United States, there's the allied Pacific states that are ruled by Japan.
Right.
There's the Greater American Reich, which is ruled by Germany. And then there's the neutral zone in the middle, where it's sort of like, you know, outlaw territory, but with some certain kinds of power strains in it, right? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I started to watch it. I think I watched a couple of episodes.
Takes a few to get into it.
Isn't there an episode where a guy takes acid and he says, "Oh, this feels oceanic" or something like that?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that's Joe Blake.
Oh yeah. Yes. That was a little bit later though. That was in the 2nd season. Yes.
Yeah, I think I caught that. So there was a lot of interesting stuff around that series, and that there was a guy that was heading up content mm-hmm. for Amazon. He was like, you know, the executive producer, mm-hmm. and I think there was a woman directly involved with the Man in the High Castle. I'm not sure if she was related to Phil or not, but there was a big Me Too moment with her and this guy who was basically running Amazon content.
Oh, interesting.
And he had to leave. He had to step down. And, you know, true confession, it was like, I had, because she was involved with that show, it was like, I really wasn't that interested.
Yeah.
At that point. And it's like, I mean, that's not to say that people aren't abused and people aren't, and like that stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
It happens. It really does. I don't want to say it doesn't happen, but sometimes these things do occur, and sometimes these things are happening between 2 adults.
Yeah.
And it may be misinterpreted.
Yep.
Or, you know, one person may see it as an opportunity.
Yep.
To like get rid of somebody else, maybe move up, whatever, you know. And I kind of felt like, again, I don't know everything about that situation, but it kind of felt like that to me. Like this guy was probably hitting on her, and maybe, you know, he got a little too cozy, a little too friendly, and then next thing you know, he's done. Yeah. So I just, you know, I saw parts of it, and then that thing hit. I was like, I'm not really that interested.
Well, some of the little like interesting things I take away. Obviously, there's this whole thing with multiple realities, and there being this underground like machine or technology called Die Nebenwelt, right? That I think is probably close to something that we're actually dealing with, right? And this, you know, various realities thing. Like I have wondered for a long time if we wake up in the same place every day. But I feel that more and more now. Like I can tell sometimes the subtle difference. And sometimes you go back to when you were at a few days ago or whatever, but I don't know that we're in the same place or same reality stream or something every day. But there's a few things in there. I think that that I watched Dark City recently too, and Rufus Soul is the main character in both of these, right? Which is interesting. I do feel like there's some connection in like an inverse relationship kind of way between the characters. Another thing I noticed was Joe Blake, who's a main character in the first 2 seasons. It's looks like he looks a lot like Richard Spencer. Right?
Well, interesting, yeah.
A lot like Richard Spencer.
But do you think that they would just like, let's cast somebody who looks like Richard Spencer, or they would get somebody and say, we want to sculpt him to look like this, or what do you think? Or do you think it's just this weird kind of synchromistic kind of personification?
I think maybe all 3, depending on which reality, right? Like, I think all 4 combination thereof. Like, I don't know if it was like, let's get someone that looks like Richard Spencer, right? Or if there's a synchromistic connection, or if like there's a revelation being told about who Richard Spencer actually is, or something like that, right? But he looks an awful lot like him. So these are things that are within the show that sort of relate to like the out here reality. But there's a few things going on in our reality in the political space, like this Tulsi Gabbard thing, that make me wonder if we're in the same place. So 2 things have happened in the last week, right? All of a sudden, one day the FBI is acknowledging that they have Seth Rich's computer, right? After like for a long time, it was no, 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 no. Why all of a sudden last week, now we have it? Right? We have Richard. So have we moved into a reality like where there's some different relationship between the FBI and the Seth Rich computer? And then the other one is this interesting thing yesterday with Julian Assange, right? So like, did you hear that recording?
No, I didn't hear the recording, no.
Julian Assange is warning the State Department that somebody stole the cables from him and that they're going to be released, and he's trying to help them to reduce the amount of damage that is done. But he's not like clear looking like he's working for them, but he's basically saying, look, somebody stole, like an ex-employee stole these cables, and he's getting to release an unredacted version. So you need to warn your people who are undercover or whatever that this is going to happen. So he's trying to like get the truth out, but minimize the damage in a way that they always say he was reckless, right? So like, it's odd that it's coming out like right now. Right? Like, where has that recording been? The recording was from 2011.
Oh, wow. Really? 2011?
2011. And of course, yesterday also came out, WikiLeaks made a drop, right? Like apparently a big drop. I haven't looked at that yesterday. But this recording that came out, like, I don't see how anyone, like even people who think that Julian Assange is a traitor and reckless and all that kind of stuff, if you listen to him talking to the guy at the State Department and how thankful the guy at the State Department is that he was giving him this warning, that then, that same State Department later called him like, a reckless, private intelligence operator who's running his own, whatever kind of thing. Like, huh? Right? So it's like we're being suddenly fed like important information about the nature of our sort of political and intelligence-based reality, right? That suddenly some of the elements are quite different. Right. And while I think things can be covered up and then they can come out and all that kind of stuff and whatever, I think it's very, very much just as likely that there's been something that has shifted about our reality and we're in a different space. You know what I mean? I think we're going through some kind of adjustment, and I'm sure the astrology says this, right? But as well as like all the other kinds of cycles there are besides the astrological cycles, where we're in that spot right now where everything is very unstable and unsure, including our touch with reality. And I don't mean that in that we're crazy, right? But that like, like maybe there's this entire array of fractals in front of us, right? And like when you sort of step out of your house every morning, you're not necessarily stepping into the same sort of piece of reality like every day. Like, sometimes you wake up and like I've had a lot of people telling me that like something has been missing for a long time, and then they wake up and it's right back in the place that it's always been, but had been missing for weeks, days, months, years, whatever it is, right? So what do you think about that? I mean, I know that I've even had a personal Mandela effect with you, and you were kind of talking about some Mandela effects and stuff the other day. We sometimes have these interesting text conversations while I'm running and and whatnot. But like, are you seeing any of that kind of stuff?
A little bit. I mean, I have some thoughts about it, but it was so I followed Kirstie Alley on Twitter,
Yeah.
And she's actually really funny.
She's great. Yeah.
Like that's a Twitter feed you should follow because she's hilarious. She's, brassy, ballsy,
Yep.
passionate. I really enjoy reading her Twitter feed. Anyway, she lost her remote and she couldn't find her remote. And she said, my friend was over here. I remember seeing it. My friend left and now I can't find my remote. And she was freaking out because she couldn't find her remote. And so it kind of plays into a little bit about what you're saying, right? I saw this video, I think it was about 2 days ago, and it was this young Russian guy, and he was talking about the Earth's position to the galactic center, and there's like these recent findings that like just very recent.
This is like the Russian episode. You keep referring to all these Russian people.
and apparently we're a lot closer to the galactic center than we thought. And even if by like light years or whatever kind of distance you want to attribute to it, right? Whatever it is, it may be like infinitesimal but they were wrong.
Right.
So now we're closer to the galactic center, and it's like, wow, we're really on this outer ring out here, right? And we're spiraling towards this enormous black hole.
Yep.
In the center of the universe.
Yep.
And which is, in Sagittarius, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's an interesting, like, cosmic phenomenon. Like there's this quasar that sits right outside the galactic center, and it's like pulses like into the galactic center, and the galactic center theoretically is sucking things in, right? Because it's a black hole, but apparently it's also emitting things as it's coming out. So it's this very interesting kind of balance, right?
Yep.
But if that's true, and we're actually closer to the galactic center than we used to be or thought we were, that at least I think that's interesting from a phenomena perspective.
All kinds of anomalous stuff. I've had people, because I've talked about some of this stuff, in some videos. I've had people contact me telling me that things that they lost at their home, right, a number of months or years ago, like they'll be at the beach and suddenly it's on the ground at the beach. They're walking along and the earring or the thing that they
That's
have.
pretty, maybe Kirstie Alley should go to the beach.
Right. That I've had somebody tell me that like they lost some piece of jewelry or something in their driveway, right? And they looked for it every day. Wasn't there. Suddenly it's there and it's got like rust all over it. Like it had been there all along and been rained on and this and that and whatnot, right? So it's like we're having some phenomena that, in my opinion, if we weren't so distracted and solely focused on two stupid things, right, people would be noticing that something is very odd here, right?
Yeah.
But instead, all of the oddities can be written off to, well, things feel really weird because we're not doing our normal life. We stay inside our house. We don't go out very often. Everyone has a mask on, this and that. It's confusing, blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of this is to cover up like anomalous things going on in our realm.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate like jab at this thing, that there are a lot of anomalous things going on, and because of all the Sturm und Drang and all the chaos coming at us from all these different areas, it can be in some ways difficult to kind of pick up or understand or follow. And I think there's some truth to that. What I've always wondered is like there's like this thing with the Man in the High Castle about this alternate reality with the Nazis. It's like it's not uncommon. I think there was a Star Trek episode where the Nazis kind of won. I think this has gone on a couple of times in movies. But it's like in every single case, they wind up still being Nazis and still being like evil people, right?
Right.
Why don't they have a version where on the other timeline, like the Nazis win, and guess what? Life's actually pretty good.
Right.
Like that never happens.
Right.
That absolutely never happens. That they always kind of incarnate on the alternate timeline as evil. And wouldn't you think that maybe on an alternate timeline that maybe they may not be evil, or maybe there would be a different kind of reality? It's just a thought, right? They always cast them in the same way.
There's another reality just that's been generated at where we're at. So I can't say yet what the portrayal is in this version, right? Yeah. So like you know what I mean? So I don't know, but yes, right. Like it is, there's only like they're only allowed to like they have to stay on the paper, right? Like kind of thing. They're allowed to color outside the lines, but they have to stay on the paper, right? Yeah. It's like that kind of thing. So,
it's really quickly, really interesting. There's like a lot of new information coming out about Jesse Owens and his time at the Olympics in Berlin in 1936.
Yeah.
And how his relationship with German athletes and the German people, and to some extent even Hitler, was actually really like friendly.
Yep.
Like they liked Jesse Owens.
Mm-hmm.
They respected Jesse Owens. And yet it was painted that Jesse Owens was the guy that defeated the evil Nazis at the 36 Olympics. And that really wasn't, I mean, yeah, he was great.
I've seen some of the same stuff you've seen. Yeah.
And like, that's coming out now. Like, well, guess what? They treated him really well and they were really respectful, and he had a great relationship with a German sprinter. So we're in a constant barrage of propaganda.
Yeah. And we've been lied to about everything, including where we are, what this is, like, kind of who we are and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, like at this point, like I think that like question, right? I have questions about everything, even the things that I thought for a long time that I had all sorted out and I knew the truth about, like, because like when you, like, if we don't even understand what the earth actually is, forget about the shape. What is it? Mm-hmm. Right? Like the shape is just a feature of whatever it is. If we don't even understand that, how can we actually know about any of the other stuff? Right? So it's like, I really liked your interview with Howdy, right? Because I feel like this is a really neutral, like this is like his view on things comes from a fairly neutral place. When I say neutral, I don't mean he doesn't care, but like he's not, a lot of times when people start asking questions and proposing alternate theories and stuff, they do it from a very egoic place that they have figured out something that you have not, kind of thing. And it's because they're special, or they've had a near-death experience, or they're an alien, or they're whatever, a super soldier, da da da. He's like, I had this experience and it taught me that I don't actually know anything, that this thing is fake, and maybe so am I. And what is going on here? I have questions, and the more answers I have, the more questions I have. And I think that that's where we all have to be right now. That anybody out there who's like, nope, this is what's going on, and this is what's going to, like, I just don't see how anyone can be there if they're being honest with themselves. It's fucking confusing, dude.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with like the shifting sands, beneath the tides, underneath our feet, right? I mean, this is kind of where we are right now. And we're in, I think, a slipstream of sorts.
Yeah.
And I think that the people who have basically managed resets for a very long time, they know that, and they're taking advantage of this time.
Yep.
And maybe it's a little ahead of schedule for them, which I kind of think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think it is. I think that they probably wanted to maybe roll this out a little earlier, because it's happening so quickly and so many people are seeing it now, which is, I think, is kind of interesting too.
Well, I think these people who are managing resets, like, they're not actually in charge of resets. They're just managing the public perception. I think it's a natural, organic, cyclical process, right? That they have gathered information about, that they're keeping for themselves and not telling us about. So part of the management is to make us think that they're the ones doing it. When they're not controlling it, they're just like controlling our perception of it so that we think they're in charge. And, you know, they had figured out a few things like how to write it out more safely so that they maintain their assets while everybody else loses their shit.
That's right. Yep.
That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are cycles,
Yeah.
and that they understand the cycles, and it's kind of like it's like an algorithm.
Yes.
But I think what's interesting this time, and maybe this is my egoic perception,
I think there's something different this time.
I think there is something different this time, and I think it has something to do with critical mass.
Yeah, with us. It has to do with us.
Yeah, critical mass and some degree of deeper cognition.
Yes, 100% agree.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is that there are two things. Number one, I think technology has played a role. Like technology has been a linear accelerator for
you
people,
got it. Yeah.
for people to wake up and put things together. The other side of that is that technology is waiting in the wings to usher in like the Klaus Schwab version of the reset, which is really dark, really, really dark. So here we are, we're at this threshold now. And
I think there's been unexpected side effects. So they put some of this technology in place or created it for the Klaus Schwabian thing that you're talking about. And there were these unexpected, unintended side effects that now they're having to contend with, right? And I think the thing that's different is I don't think it's going to work this time. I think they got a little too self-confident, right, in believing that they can control the reset, and they forgot that they're just managers. They started thinking they're controllers.
Or that it was a third party that entered into the game, and changed something that they weren't aware of or had not had to deal with in previous resets.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
And it's kind of like the same thing when Trump won the election. Like I predicted he was going to win. I mean, you were there. We talked about it on the show with Randy.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was supposed to win. Right? I don't think Trump was supposed to win.
I think it was a last minute decision. I think they decided it that night.
Yep, I think so too. And he was shocked.
Yeah.
He was absolutely shocked. But I do think something was going on with the voting machines. Because that was all Dominion stuff, even back then.
The things have been going on with the voting machines since they started using voting machines.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were using the Dominion systems.
Of course.
In 2016. So somebody got in, and I think was doing something with the voting system.
The same people that are rigging it this time were rigging it that time. They just rigged it a different way. So
that's right.
It's the same.
So Trump, when they announced that he's the winner, he's stunned. He's totally stunned. And I was like, wow, man, this is really interesting, because this guy's, normally just so cocksure and like, I knew it. It was like, he really is like kind of, flabbergasted over this thing.
I don't think he actually wanted to be president.
I don't think he did either. I don't think he did either. And now all of a sudden he was there, he's president, and Hillary was visibly upset. I mean, you could see that.
I watched them say, we're going to shut down for the night and go home. We'll be back tomorrow. Yeah.
And when she showed up with Bill the next day, you could tell she'd been crying and screaming all night. She looked like hell.
Well, because she'd been tricked or something like that, right? She'd been tricked.
Yeah. And it was the second time it happened.
Yeah.
They did the same thing with her and Obama, except they just did it on the campaign trail.
Yeah, no, different time, just like they did it with Bernie at a different time this time than they did last time, and whatever, right? So I do. So here's my theory. My theory is, I'm not sure the same people who got into the Dominion systems this time were the ones that did it in 2016. Okay.
I think it was somebody else, and they weren't prepared for that. Like, I don't think they were prepared for that. Like, somebody did get in and hack those systems. Now, were they Russians? I don't know.
Do you think it's the same So do you think that this is just part of what you were talking about on your show this morning about that, like somebody hacked the Pentagon back in March? Somebody hacked the Pentagon and
Well,
that.
that's the big story right now. I was driving back home to hook up with you, and they're playing it on the radio, and I mean they're making this thing sound like it is the fucking end of the world,
Right.
and that it's affected not just one thing, but like all these things. And what was really interesting is that they were talking about Russia.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about that this has Russia's signature on it. And then, of course, they were getting the lowdown from President-elect Joe Biden,
Right.
and how he's going to handle these things, which says to me that Biden's going to be the next president. Now it's done. It is unless something really weird happens, and it could. It's 2020. That it's going to be the Biden show, and the Biden Kamala show. That's what I think. That's what I think.
That's what
But again, now we've got this new thing with the computer systems.
the computer systems.
And the hack, the big hack. I don't know if it's the same people, but I do think that when Trump was elected, that's when this thing became a big wrinkle. Like there was something that happened there that shifted things.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this third party kind of consciousness, or this third party, comes in and changes the game. And then it becomes everything about destroying Trump.
Well, then what about, okay, this takes me back to a couple of things, right? So like in David Martin's book, Coup de 12, that he put out in 2011, right? He talked about when the presidency, so both when 9/11 happened, right? It was a group of younger people who did not necessarily like the way that the old guard or their parents or something who had been the world controllers were doing things. And this was their move to show that they were taking control of things, right? And then they purchased the presidency, the Barack Obama presidency. And when I talked to David Martin, the last interview I did, he basically said that the Trump presidency was purchased too. I wasn't clear on whether it was by the same faction or not, right? But that this was like kind of a rogue thing, that like starting from 9/11, this was a rogue thing that was outside the traditional people who had been the sort of power brokers, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is a further extension of that, or if there's something that has come in at the next level again, right? Their children or or whatever, right? Or people who had worked for them and didn't like the way they handled things or whatever. So that, but then also back to this Julian Assange thing, right? He was obviously being hacked too. So the hacker was being hacked. And when you have the person who usually like is trying to expose, I think he tried to expose in the most responsible way he could, right? To a certain extent. And I don't know if that was because he was working for someone or just because, I don't know. I don't know all the
what was Assange a hacker, or was he more of a distributor?
Well, he used to be a hacker, I believe, he was younger, and then he became just like a publisher of leaked and hacked documents that would be given to him, right?
Right.
And so far, he has 100%. No one's ever proven him to be wrong about anything. That doesn't mean he hasn't been wrong, but nobody's able to come forth with the evidence to show so. So if he is also being hacked, right, then like who's that player? Who's the player that's paying somebody to hack him, right? And is that the same people that are now hacking the Pentagon, hacking solar winds, hacking whatnot, right? Like what's going on?
Right. Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it's a very good question. And then, and how much of this is actually really believable? I mean, this is all, we're off into 1984 territory.
Again, the confusion, the chaos.
Right. So they say that the Pentagon got hacked.
But did it really? Right.
But did it really get hacked?
Right.
And they also said the DNC got hacked, but it didn't get hacked. Someone leaked stuff. Right. Right.
And because most of the public doesn't understand the difference between a hack and a leak. Right? Like they just don't. They don't understand the difference. It's just like they don't understand the difference between a law and a mandate and an edict and a decree and a whatever, right? So
speaking of hack, you never see people playing hacky sack anymore.
Right? Were you good at it?
I was okay.
You know who I bet is good at hacky sack? Tim Pool.
I bet you Tim Pool can hacky sack.
Yeah, I bet you that like, he is the kind of person. Yeah, I bet you he's fucking really good at hacky sack.
The hacky sack was like the fish crowd thing. That was a
Yeah.
that was a hacky sack. You don't see people hacky sacking.
No. You know who else I bet you is the hacky sacker? I think, have I asked him? I think I did. I bet you Michael Wan's a hacky sacker. He likes stuff like that too, right? I have to ask. I think, did he tell me he likes that? He has all these little leather balls and things he likes to play with. Like, you know, whenever you're talking to him, he's got like some crystal or some little leather thing he made that's, you know, whatever. But he's that type too, the hacky sack type. I thought it was neat when I would see kids like, you know, I would see people doing it down at like Venice Beach or whatever, right? Like people could keep going for a really long time.
Yeah, I was okay. You know, I could get in a circle and kick it around a little bit, but I wasn't like the Pele of hacky sack.
Yeah.
I used to take.
Probably good.
What's that?
Is Jasper good at it? Jasper looks like he'd be good.
Jasper, I don't, you know, Steve and Chris sent me one of those flippity fishes. Have you ever seen those on TV?
No.
They advertise them on Fox, and they're these like they're like fish dolls. They're like a little, I don't know, like a little spongy fish, right? And it looks like a fish, but inside of it, it's got like a little motor with a battery, and you turn it on and it starts flopping, right? And apparently their cat like freaked out when they got the flippity fish for the cat. So they sent me the flippity fish.
Yeah.
And Jasper could not deal with the flippity fish. It was like the flippity fish is like half the size of Jasper. So Rosie, on the other hand, she was like, let me study this thing. I'm going to go in on it in a second. So, you know, look, we're living in a really, I think it's still an interesting time. It's not an easy time.
No.
But it's an interesting time. We're definitely in transition. You know, we're in flux, and it's really hard to stay grounded and focused. And I think it's difficult for people to have goals and have things that, you know, like goals and dreams. I mean, a lot of these things have been put on hold.
Yeah.
And if they're not put on hold, people are already making like tacit agreements about what they'll do in order to fulfill them. You know, like wear a mask or take a shot, because in their mind, all those things are still reachable. I wound up today at HEB.
Your favorite.
Story. I always have an HEB story. So I go in the line, and they have a little sign on the plexiglass that says, the vaccine is not here yet. But it will be, and you'll be able to get it at our pharmacy. So I stick my head in between the plexiglass, the young woman there. And when I say young, maybe 18 or 19, I stick my head in and I said, don't take the vaccine. It'll sterilize you. And she said, oh, I know. My grandma's all over that. She told me, we got it covered. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, that is totally awesome. Like, her grandmother is like hip, you know, it's hip to it.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, no problem. I got it. I'm like, fuck, that's great. That's really great. Like, so there are people that see, this is a level of awareness.
Yeah.
That is currently taking place. I think the vaccine thing, I'm going to go on record, I think it's going to be a bust.
Totally. I 100% agree with you.
It's going to be a real bust, and they'll shake their fists, and, you know.
I think they played like one card too many with the possible side effect is HIV. Right? Like, when, like, I think at that moment when that came out, like, people who I never hear questioning anything were like, whoa. Right.
It's also like, how much can people really take?
Right.
You know, and it's like, oh, fuck, I gotta take a vaccine now, and I gotta wear a mask. That's what fuck that. I won't take the vaccine and I won't wear the mask. So I also think it's like
there's that story from China about the flight attendants being told to wear diapers, right? And that's really where this is going with people, right? Like if people, like, and I think nobody wants to wear a fucking diaper. certainly not on their ass. They might be willing to wear one on their face, but they don't want to wear one on their ass.
Well, some people, you'd be surprised. All right, so they'll never hear this because they won't watch this.
Right.
But some friends of Jones
Mhm.
are going to Galveston, and they don't want to have to stop at bathrooms. So they've purchased urinals so they can use their private urinals along the way on the way to Galveston.
The travel John?
I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, I have a
Right.
travel John in my bug out bag. Yeah.
Right. But it's not there for bug out. It's there for them to avoid public restrooms so they don't catch the corona.
Remember that story? Like, I forget what it was. It was like some weird story, but like some woman who was like leaving her husband to go see her boyfriend, who was like an astronaut down at the Space Center in Houston, and was trying to get there as fast as she could. And so she wore diapers so she wouldn't pee. Do you remember this story?
I do remember that story. It was really weird. Like there are weird stories that have never really been completed.
Yes.
I think the weirdest story, and I know you remember this, that's never really been like followed up on, was the Israeli biochemist scientist in LA. Do you remember the story?
Which
It was
one?
around 2010. And the cops they swarmed this guy, and they were hitting him with like tear gas. But apparently, because of his work, he had built up an immunity to tear gas. So the tear gas wasn't working on him. And he had something to do with like a virus. Like this ain't, you know the story?
No.
Can you hit me? Let me share screen.
All right. Yeah. I mean, in that period of time, like while I was doing a lot of research, I wasn't paying attention to the news very much because I was busy doing drugs. I keep hitting the wrong button here. I was busy doing drugs. And so sometimes I would miss the actual like news stories, you know, even though I'd be researching, you know, I was very informed, but not necessarily of current events.
I gotta find this story, man, because it's a crazy. Hold on. Man, it was a wild story. They pulled this guy over, and let me just do this. And he had something to do with viruses, chemical research, and they pulled him over with urgency. And he had built up an immunity to tear gas, and they couldn't like get him out of his car because of it. God, I wish I could find it. They buried this stuff, and it was one of those stories from the 2010s that was really, really strange.
There was a bunch like in that period of time, like from like 1998 to about 2011, right? There was sometimes some stories that would pop up and get a lot of attention for 24 or 36 hours, and then memory hole.
Yeah.
Memory hole, absolute memory hole.
You know what was another really weird story from that time? I don't know if you remember this, but supposedly there was this weird group of people from some place near Russia that took over the management of a prison that had been built somewhere in nowhere, Montana.
I remember. I think I did hear about that one. Yeah.
Right. And it was really bizarre. And you know who went up there to save the day was Alex Jones.
I remember. Yep. I remember that.
The whole thing was a setup. The whole thing was a crazy setup for Alex Jones to go up there and take on like these evil, you know, Bolshevik commies.
Right. I remember that. I remember that.
With the stupid uniforms. It was really weird. And like, that was, again, one of those strange stories from that time.
Well, remember that other thing, like, and this, it was covered heavily for a couple of days about these sort of black sites in Chicago. This was also like maybe 2013, 2014. Remember this? Where like the police were like arresting people and like taking them to some place that was like outside of like the regular area that you take people, and they were like keeping them for like 36 or 48 hours, and like, but there was no cause to arrest any of these people. They were just basically snatching people, taking them there, running them through like solitary confinement and being changed to like benches and weird shit for like 36 hours at a black site, and then just letting them go. Do you remember this story?
It sounds familiar. Yes.
That was another one where this was like the biggest thing the alternative media was focused on for like 36 to 72 hours, and then we never heard anything about it again.
Yep. Yeah, just memory hole stuff.
Like it was like, you know what a pop-up is, Robert?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It was like a pop-up black site. Like they were just trying it out for 3 days to see if it was a go or not, and then put it away, right? Like that's kind of what it feels like, right? Like your pop-up prison there, right? Just like see what happens with this one. I don't know.
Yeah, no. It's like even more recently, like Charles Lieber, the guy from
yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's happened to him?
What's happened with that? What's happened with that? Yeah.
You know, it's like the floor just opened and he went down the hole and the floor closed up. I mean, this is a guy that theoretically they arrested, fined him. He was involved with Wuhan, the lab.
Yeah.
Head of virology at Harvard, a big guy at nanotech.
Yeah.
You don't hear a peep about Charles Lieber anymore.
Well, it's just like the same thing when they arrest these people with these false flag stuff and whatever, right? Like that kind of thing. It's like where do they go? What's happening?
Yeah.
Right? Like what is happening?
It's true. I mean, I've tracked a few of those people, and there's really no follow-up. There's no record of any kind of resolution or closure.
Yeah. And then even the ones that they're supposedly like, it's, you know, like the Dzhokhar Tsarnaev in the fucking courtroom was not the Dzhokhar Tsarnaev that was on the cover of fucking Rolling Stone magazine. Right. And the James, what's the guy, the Aurora shooter guy named James
Holmes.
James Holmes, like the James Holmes that was in the courtroom is not the same one that the picture that they showed us from the kid from San Diego. It is not the same person. Right.
Yep. And the weird thing about that James Holmes thing is, so he comes from the same town that John Earnest, the guy who supposedly shot up the synagogue, the Chabad synagogue in Poway.
Sure.
They come from the same town,
right?
Same, and the James. No, just blank him out. His father,
time travel.
His father is a major teacher at Stanford.
Yeah. Right? And James Holmes was working on some kind of like time travel technology.
Right. And John Earnest's father, while not a teacher at Stanford, was involved in similar things like mathematics. And it's like there's this weird kind of thing going on with these two guys, like from the same area. Like they both were essentially almost went to the same high schools, right?
Yeah.
Like really strange stuff. And but where's John Earnest now? And what a name, right? He's Ernest,
right?
And he got red pilled.
Yeah.
He got red pilled.
There's also, remember that Jared Loughner who shot Gabby Giffords?
Yep.
Right. Well, remember like that weird stuff that was on his YouTube channel and stuff like that about this like conscious dreaming experiment that he had been part of. Right. Like kind of thing, like waking up.
Yeah.
Right. There's always this shit that is just like, and it just kind of goes away. You know, they kind of, you know, hide and bury that kind of stuff in those questions. That Gabby Giffords one was a weird one to me. That whole thing was bizarre. Like, I didn't care that much about Sandy Hook. I thought that one was like, they were trying to make us more interested in it than it really should be. Like I found during that period of time, the Jared Loughner thing was much more interesting. The Holmes thing and the Boston bombing to me was like that one was super fascinating. I thought Sandy Hook was like, I don't know. I didn't find it that interesting. But
I think Gabby Gifford's husband just just won an election
Right.
in Arizona.
Yeah, he's weird. And he was an astronaut, right? There's always some fucking space shit with all these stories. There's always some kind of like space shit or time travel shit or dream weird, world weird shit. It's never.
NASA's always kind of lurking in the background.
Right, NASA. Yeah. What do you think NASA really is, Robert?
What do I think it is? I think it's a basic, a huge money laundering asset. That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
I think they pump billions of dollars through there, some of which gets used for who knows what, much of which gets probably black budgeted or who knows what they do with the money.
It's really funny how sometimes you'll be like reading a paper about some kind of project that's going on or some kind of military, some kind of something going on that has nothing in any way at all to do with anything space related at all, like not tangentially, not 2 degrees out, not 3 degrees out, but somehow like NASA will be funding the paper, right? Or like they'll, NASA's doing some kind of work or something on it. It's like, I thought you guys were supposed to be busy figuring out how to get through that radiation belt again. You know what I mean? Like what's that? Like it is weird. It's weird.
Well, it's kind of like how I feel about Michael Flynn lately. Like, like all I see now is Michael Flynn doing speeches and tweeting. It's like, dude, should you be like working on some kind of like really strategic plan to, do whatever you're supposed to do? You seem to be getting a lot of FaceTime, a lot of interview time, a lot of tweeting time. You don't seem to be really much into the strategic planning time.
Right.
What's going on here? I'm kind of missing something.
John Brisson told me that he's doing something because John Brisson's a Christian and he's like, he hates John Flynn. He's like, he's doing like, he called it like a Jericho program or something. Like it's like scamming people by running some kind of like Christian leaning operation through their mind kind of thing. Right? Like
and they had the Jericho stage at the rally in Washington on Saturday.
Okay, that must have been what it was. I couldn't understand. I don't know anything about religious stuff, really, whatever. So I wasn't sure what John was talking about, but he's like, yeah, dude, he's running some fucking Jericho scam or some shit like that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And he's also really tight with Tracy Beans, which I find very interesting.
The Tracy Beans thing, like I don't understand the appeal. Like I remember when she first came out, like when she first started having a YouTube channel, people would send me shit and I was like, I can't listen to this person's voice. This is like it made my skin fucking crawl, right? And then the fucking like Q stuff and then sort of the disowning of that, but always this fucking patriot stuff. Like, who the fuck is this person? Where did she come from? And why do we care what she says? And her voice is so fucking annoying. I don't understand. But like I hear people who like, it was the weird, like people who I think are from like the more mainstream, like MAGA political stream, not like the slightly QE alternative media thing, refer to her like she's some kind of like important authoritative source. And I'm just like, huh? Right? Like, I don't know. I've never.
Well, they seem to have kind of adopted these sort of new media figures.
Yeah.
She's one of them. Corey's Diggs is another person who I think.
Mm-hmm. These are all Q people who then tried to distance themselves from Q at a certain point.
But Mike Flynn mentions her in his tweets, Corey's Diggs, or if it's a her, I don't know if it's a her or not.
Yeah, it's a her.
And then Millie Weaver has a relationship with Mike Flynn, and so it's interesting how they brought these, kind of alternative media types and women,
yeah,
by the way, into that fold. And the thing, the 3-ring circus with Alex Jones and Millie Weaver on Saturday was bizarre. Did you see it?
No, but I don't understand why anybody I mean, it's sure, why do we even take Alex Jones serious at all? But I don't understand why anybody's taking Millie Weaver seriously.
Oh, Millie Weaver is like giving a speech to the troops. and it's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And then Alex Jones like starts to storm it's really bizarre. I'm like,
that's perfect because it's all bullshit. So that's kind of perfect, right?
I mean, he really loses his shit. He really does. He goes berserk. And he tried to explain it and stuff. afterwards. But it's just really strange.
So he doesn't like Millie Weaver after the Shadowgate thing. Is that what this is all about, or what is this?
I mean, I guess. I mean, I'm still confused as to why he was like just about ready to have a coronary and almost getting into a fight with somebody who's guarding Millie Weaver's stage. It was really weird.
Wow. Huh.
And I here's what I think happened. I think he thought he could get up there and pull the mic away from her, pull the bullhorn away from her. I think that's what he was trying to do. And then he met with the resistance of her security team or whoever's security team. The whole thing was just bizarre. I'm like, and you people are going to lead the fucking revolution.
Right. I mean, this whole thing, I mean, that's this, like, here's, and I guess maybe this is like my biggest issue, right? Like, we obviously have a problem in this country and in the entire world, right? That there's no question about this. But like the certain thread of this MAGA thing and certainly the Q thing is like the stupidest possible like remedy for this.
Well, it's an organizing principle, and people have a difficult time organizing themselves without an organizing principle. That's why certain religions have been very successful, because they provide an organizing principle. The organizing principle of so-called democracy is over. The social contract's been broken, right. So there's no organizing principle for that. But so that's why I think.
So trust the plan is like just to have faith in a better tomorrow.
But I think it's more than that. I mean, there is a sense of belonging, where we go, where we go, all one goes, or where one goes, all we all go, whatever that thing. So there's a sense of belonging, a sense of that really, Q is a mystery cult.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a sacred mystery cult, and the revelations unfold as part of this sacred mystery, right? And so you all feel like you're in, and hearing like the voice of God,
right?
Coming to you through symbols and signs and signifiers that people can identify, and some of those people are probably close to the Q program and they're good at it, and that's their role. And then they get a sense that they're special. Right.
You remember back at the beginning of this when Randy found that like Q software?
I think so.
Yeah, and it seems to be some sort of like information distribution kind of software that like seemed to be something algorithmically that matched up to what Q was kind of turning out to be in the real world, right? It was something like that. I went looking for the post like a while back. I can't find it, but yes.
And there's always kind of this Christian overlay with Q as well.
They always that shit. The Christians fall for that shit all the time, dude.
So I think as a program and an organizing principle, it was very powerful.
Yep.
Because number one, it gave them a sense of belonging. Where we go one, we go all. It gave them a sense of being part of the unfolding of a sacred mystery.
Yeah.
Number two, it allowed them to go down rabbit holes like pedophilia, adrenochrome, underground bases, things like that. So they had access to material that other people didn't have access to.
Yeah.
And so that was a really kind of important thing. And then there's the Christian kind of overlay. And then at the top of the pyramid is Trump.
Right.
Who is going to lead them kind of into this version of the new age, and there are very new age elements associated with Q. It's kind of new agey.
It's like Christian New Age. It's
kind of like Christian New Age meets Dan Brown.
But that good call there. Yep.
And the idea that there's finally somebody who is like representative of the people and will stand by them and stand with them. And you put all that together, it's very potent. It's very, very potent, and the drops and everything, and it's like waiting for the next one, for the next one, for the next one. And look, I've said it. I think Q, like I do think there's some value in some ways because there are things that people have found out through
Sure.
that they may never have found out.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's actually good. And I think that in some ways it gave people, and maybe to this day still does, it gives them a sense of potentiality in a time where, you know, there isn't really any potentiality. But then you say, well, maybe that's false light. You don't want to follow that anyway. But I think that mainly as an incubator, I think it's been probably pretty useful. But at some point, you have to kind of step back and step away and say, you know, all right, I've learned what I've learned, and I found out, by the way, I have a client, and she told me that she started following an astrologer called Starseed Astrology, who is using astrology in Q, and trying and saying that Trump knows astrology and all these things are. So I never heard about it, but that's kind of interesting, right? That somebody would do this and put astrology together with what Q was doing, because now you got a bunch of different hooks coming in.
Yeah.
Right. You got a bunch of hooks coming in from that area.
That person must have been a real cult leader that really gets them with the astrology.
Right. Right. Versus another supposed cult leader.
Right. So last thing, maybe, I mean, I could go, you and I could talk about a million topics forever and whatnot, but what do you think happens between now and January 20th or 20th?
Well, that's a really interesting question.
Is the conjunction a thing or is it a nothing? And what happens? You know?
Well, I think the conjunction is a something. I do.
Okay.
I do think it's a something. The thing with astrology, theoretically, right? When these two, I mean, it's very rare when Jupiter and Saturn come together at that degree, and especially in the sign of Aquarius. This is like a really interesting time to, at the very least, be witness to a celestial phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
And I've tried to kind of sort this thing out. And the one thing that I think is inherent in this is a sense of possibility. Like Aquarius is about wild cards. Aquarius is unpredictable. So when you get Jupiter and Saturn together, and what's interesting about them is that they're very theoretically like Saturn's like Satan, right? I mean, there's a reason why Saturn and Satan kind of sound alike. When people talk about, oh, Saturn, I've got Saturn in this and Saturn in that, right? They talk about it in those kinds of terms, that they're having to, you know, to deal with the devil of their astrological life. And then Jupiter is Jove. It's jovial, right? It's big, it's airy, and it's theoretically a very different kind of energy. Theoretically, when you bring them together, now you have the synthesis between these two, you know, celestial forces. And in Aquarius, it's just going to be, I think it's going to be really fascinating, because I think what we'll get a lot of I think we're going to get a lot of oppression. I think there's going to be a lot of oppression because Jupiter makes Saturn bigger. Okay. Right. That's what happens. So we'll get like more lockdowns, more this, more that. Aquarius is science, it's surveillance. We'll get a lot of that. Simultaneously, we'll get the expansion happening with, we're tired of being slaves. Yeah. We're tired of being under the thumb of Saturn. We're tired of being under the thumb of the elites. So that's going to be happening simultaneously. Yeah. And I think it's going to be interesting. And, you know, let the games begin.
Let the games begin, right? Yeah. It's been like, even though it hasn't been a boring year, it's just been kind of in some ways monotonous, and everybody just kind of going along with the program. And I think that some action's about to happen, right? And I do feel like it can be a little terrifying the next couple of weeks, but it also feels full of like possibility and maybe some wonder. And I think like some very you know, this is a great time to sort of go against the grain. Just be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It may as well.
I think people have to show some level of restraint
Mhm.
with violence and
Oh, yeah.
guns and arms right now.
Yep.
They have to show some level of restraint. And as much as I would love to see a bunch of these people getting their asses kicked, because I think a lot of them really deserve it because they're bullies, and I hate bullies.
Yeah.
And, you know, unfortunately, it seems like the thing that will accomplish this more often than not is firearms.
Right.
But there's a lot of priming that's been going on, and we're reaching this kind of boiling point.
Yeah. The crescendo point. Yeah.
Because there's no resolve, right? It's like
Nothing ever gets resolved. Yeah.
it just keeps taking this thing. Well, there's January 6th and there's January 20th, right? And meanwhile, you know, people are losing their jobs and they're losing their minds. And then you have to throw in like the false flag factor. Like, and that is definitely in play.
Like the blue beam false flag, or like the cyber pandemic false flag?
Cyber pandemic, blue beam, or, you know, the rogue, pissed off Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Who theoretically does something terrible, right? So, I mean, all these things now are kind of lined up. So any one of those little dominoes can fall, and we're having to deal with the ramifications of that.
Yeah.
So, and astrologically, Mars is in Aries, and it's moving into square with Pluto, and it's moving into square with Saturn. And that's where things get really tense, really, really tense, because Saturn is in Capricorn. Well, I think it just moved into Aquarius right now, but it is squaring Jupiter. Technically speaking, by degree, it will be in square with Saturn still, and it's in square with Pluto. And Capricorn represents, you know, it's the ruling class, it's the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And Mars is martial, and it's, you know, it's in Aries. And we went through this retrograde period where there's a lot of tension, a lot of frustration built up. It's moving forward now, and it doesn't move into Taurus until the first of the year. And even then, see, the first of the year though, when Mars moves into Taurus and begins to square Saturn again from a different angle, and then it also winds up conjuncting with Uranus, that's an explosive time. That's a really, really explosive time. January, I think January is going to be the month that everything changes in a pretty dramatic way. So when I say everything, I'm not talking about life becomes a Garden of Eden or anything like that. But there are things that will take place in January that will have very intense short-term effects, and potentially even more profound longer-term effects that come out of whatever happens in January. Something significant, really, and it's not the Biden inauguration. There's very volatile energy, and there's a huge amount of Aquarian planets lined up, just like there were in 1962, the last time Jupiter and Saturn were together in the sign of Aquarius. So that time period, that is very specific, like I think it's like the 6th or 7th of February. It's called the Antichrist chart.
Mm.
The astrologers had said, well, if the Antichrist was born at this time during the 20th century, it'd be this day.
Oh, interesting.
It'd be during this. And what's interesting is like nobody really famous is born on that specific day, but somebody famous born, I think, right after that day is Axl Rose, who is.
My dad's born February 5th, but not the 6th or the 7th.
I have to look at the specific day.
Yeah.
But I think Axl Rose and Clint Black are born.
Axl Rose is an interesting character.
Oh, he's MK Ultra kid.
So he used to come into the coffee shop that I worked at in Malibu every morning, pretty much the same time. He wasn't like a big partier like a lot of those other rock guys. He wasn't a drug addict. He, you know, but I think that weeks and months would go by without him washing his shirt or his hair, for sure.
Right.
I've never seen greasy hair like that before in my life.
Stories have leaked out about him in his youth, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
Like what he went through as a kid is really bad.
Yeah.
Huge trauma shit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it seemed like it. He seemed like it. He was nice though.
Anyway, that energy's coming back in January. So we're going to see the return of that 1962 energy. And I was listening to, this is kind of interesting. I was listening to this guy, Russ Winter, who has a website called Winter Watch. Okay. And he has this, does this podcast with this guy, Eric Gajewski, who goes by Tradcat. And Eric Gajewski is like a really, like kind of hardcore Catholic, although he has people from other, like, you know, ideas and spaces on a show. And he was talking about something really interesting as it related to the Antichrist and as it related to the vaccine. And he said that there would be something in the vaccine. He was actually able to kind of point to it in the Bible, that there would be something in the vaccine that when people were hit with a certain frequency, that they would feel like this ecstasy, like they would feel amazing, right? But it would be in concert with the introduction of a certain person. And that would be how the Antichrist would step onto the world stage. They would step onto the world stage after people had been inoculated. And in the inoculation, they'd be able to flip a switch. And instead of becoming zombies, they would have overwhelming feelings of bliss and love and seeing this person.
And they would tie it to this person because the things happened sort of simultaneously.
That's right. And they would activate the vaccines so that they would have this overwhelming feeling of love and devotion to this person who does whatever they do.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's really interesting.
I'll say this. So like, okay, so I went down, I've been into this, you know, I read this article that I found on Rents a few weeks ago about that, you know, and this is something I'd suspected from the beginning. And I talked about this with Elisa months back about, so I think like the test may be the vaccine, right? Like there's shit in the test when people stick it up their nose. And I found an article that showed this technology, this nanotechnology, which matched up to things that I experienced in my own body and pulled out of my own body back when I was using meth, right? So I think that was a place where some of these nanoparticles and smart dust and stuff were experimented with. And for a while, a good amount of time after I stopped doing drugs, right? Because you don't really understand the leftover ramifications of something, or like if there's something left behind until like you've been off it for a while, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had for like about a year after, for like a couple times within a year during the year, like it wasn't right away after I got clean from drugs, but I'd say like maybe about 9 months or a year after, right? Where I would suddenly feel like I was on speed again. Like there would be this like weird rush kind of thing. And it always happened in the same place, right? So I maybe still had some of this technology in me, some of this nano stuff I had. It's called sort of like a Theragripper, you know, it's like a weird nanobot that has parts that kind of, did you see this article?
Which one?
This one from, I'll send it to you when we're done. It's fascinating, but you know, you may even recognize this as shit you dealt with because you had some of this stuff going on with you, I know about, you know, as well. But for me, I know that it was a thing in my body and I associate it with the meth, but I think it was experimental thing there. But it would always happen when I was driving past this certain spot, right? So I had this stuff in my body probably still, and there was a frequency being emitted in this area, which is near the area that I grew up in. So it could even harken back to some of my project and programming kind of stuff. And when I would drive past this certain point, I would get that feeling like a surge of meth, right? It happened a couple of times. It wasn't happening constantly. It happened a couple of times, always in the same spot. Eventually that stopped, but later in that same spot, when I would drive past that same spot often, I would feel like I was going to fall asleep. Right? Like, so that frequency may have still been there, but I didn't have this sort of activated thing in my body kind of thing or whatever, right? So yeah, I think shit like that is definitely on the table.
Well, especially if we're in a place where, you know, people are losing hope, there's tons of chaos, you know, the threat of war. You know, these are really the conditions that theoretically the Antichrist or an Antichrist-like figure could emerge. I
Yeah.
mean, we are getting very close to those conditions, and then, you know, having the remedy for the conditions and the suffering of the planet and the people, maybe bringing new technology along the way, right?
New technology, UBI, like all of this kind of right stuff that, like, I mean, even today, like in, you know, the I was listening a little bit to the guy in Ventura who the health department went in and tried to shut his restaurant down, and he kind of fought back and whatever. And he was saying, well, the difference between this lockdown, shutdown of businesses and the last one is the last one that they were giving us PPE checks, and now they're not.
Mhm.
Right. So like this is the person who is entrepreneurial and would rather just work and not have to deal with any of it. But in
Right.
people's heads, they're now willing to deal with it if there's PPE checks.
Well, they you know, it's a survival mechanism.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like we're getting to that space now where people would applaud UBI. Right.
Right.
Where before they were suspicious of it or didn't know about it or didn't want it or whatever, like that evolution that needed to happen to the place where people are like, well, all right, yeah, maybe UBI sounds good has happened for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you find one of the things that I'm shocked by is that the amount of enthusiasm people still have for being scared and for wearing a mask? Right now, what you talked about earlier today when you were saying how the CO2 causes anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like maybe that's some of it. Like in the beginning, there wasn't this vast anxiety other than like the fear being pushed out. But it's like, I don't understand how 10 months into this, people, you know, are still this like excited and passionate about staying home and not wearing and about wearing a mask. I mean, you know, people, we've had interactions with people we know in the last 24 or 48 hours, various ones where it's like, we know people who still haven't left their house. Like they've maybe taken one trip to the grocery store in the last 9 months.
Right.
At what point does the enthusiasm for that start to subside? Right? Like I just can't believe.
Well, I don't know if it's enthusiasm. I think it's more of a sense of surrender and submission. I think it's submission, and I think these people are suffering from Stockholm syndrome, and I think they're identifying now with their captors.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
maybe.
And it's very submissive. Putting a mask on your face is an act of submission, flat out. Right? It is a submissive act. That's what they do in Muslim countries. You put a mask on your face. It's about being submissive, not having a voice. So they have taken on. They're now identifying, and they'll fight to the death now for their captors.
Yeah.
They'll fight to the death for their bondage.
Yeah.
They will fight to the death for their bondage. And unfortunately, I think these people are dangerous.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but they're dangerous because fundamentally they can't be trusted. And I know there are people who have to fudge it and wear a mask every now and then, and I'm not really like talking about those people.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people who are, you know, really bought in, really submissive, but at the same time militant about the whole thing too.
Yeah.
And I just think that they're not trustworthy people.
You know what people I don't trust? People who don't like spicy food.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I do know some people who are fine people who I trust who don't like spicy food, but all of like the people who have really like done something incredibly untrustworthy with me or turned out to be like not who they presented themselves to be, you know, they abhor spicy food. They absolutely cannot take anything with any spice. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
Something about being taken out of their normal state at all, even just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Makes them uncomfortable, and absolutely it cannot happen, right? Yeah.
What about people that are into like overly spicy food?
I think that anybody who I think that's the thing. I know what you're talking about. I've known some people who are like out of control with it. I do think when people start to realize they like spicy food, they have a tendency to go pretty far for a while and then they come back. But if that doesn't happen, if it's just an ever increasing level of sort of spiciness and sadomasochism about it, right? Kind of thing.
Well, it releases endorphins, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
spicy food releases it, so they get hooked on the endorphin release.
Yeah, like if they're into like ghost pepper hot sauce and shit like that.
Yeah, yeah. I like spicy food,
Me too.
but I don't like it when it gets in the way of the food. Like I like to taste the food, and I like to taste the heat. When you get the food and the heat together, man, that's great.
And not all food should be spicy. I know some people who want to make everything spicy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Should be spicy. Yeah.
Yeah, like roast beef should not be spicy.
That's so funny because I was just gonna say steak should not be spicy.
Yeah, steak is, less is more with steak.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Salt, maybe some butter, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's the coda for steak.
Yeah.
But there are some foods that are actually really improved when they're spicy too.
Absolutely. Cucumber.
Yeah, for sure.
Cucumber.
I can't stand cucumbers.
Did you watch the cat cucumber video yet?
No, I haven't watched that yet.
Just look up cats and cucumbers. Okay. It is so weird, dude. It is weird.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I love like the spicy Chinese cucumbers and stuff. Like, I mean, I like cucumbers in general, but I like them with salsa. I like them with the Chinese hot sauce on it or whatever. What's your favorite? What food do you think is vastly improved by being spicy?
Well, I think Chinese food, certain Chinese food. Yeah. That's hot with those peppers.
Vietnamese food.
The Kung Pao style stuff, man. That's like the Vietnamese soups with the peppers and stuff in them. That's fantastic.
I love pho with like a lot of chili sauce in it and jalapenos and all that stuff.
I like spicy barbecue, but I don't want barbecue that's gonna burn like.
No, not spicy. It's just the right spicy. Yeah.
Like I like a good kick on the barbecue is cool.
Yeah.
But too much is like, forget about it.
No, I'm with you. Mm-hmm. All right, Robert. I think this is the biggest, longest mash we've ever done.
We probably lost people by now.
Probably.
Yeah.
We probably lost a few, but that's all right. I don't know. I don't know if you lose people, Robert. Like you seem to be kind of like Tim Pool. Like you can start streaming at any moment and any hour of any day, and at least somewhere between 143 and 247 people will always show up, not only to listen but to comment about it. So it's a chat.
Yeah, well, they have a good time in the chat room.
Yep.
And sometimes they're chatting about stuff I'm not even talking about.
Yep.
And that's great. And so it's cool where people can just go in and hang out.
It's a pocket universe, dude, for sure.
Yeah. And there are a lot of other people out there that have their own little thing. And I caught up with Owen Benjamin last week. He moved to Idaho. He got out of Washington. He's living in Idaho now.
Yeah.
And he's over on D Live, and there are times, man, Owen Benjamin can be really funny, like really hilarious.
Yeah. Do you know him?
I don't know him. No, I mean, but he does this thing now where people send him letters, and they write a letter in a certain style.
Yeah.
And they ask him to read the letter and speak in a certain way.
I don't do it.
And it's like, it's really funny. And so the people who are writing the letters are really good.
Yeah.
They're really, it's entertaining. He's highly entertaining.
All right. I'll have to check it out sometime.
Yeah. He's on D Live now.
All right. So I think this wraps it up for 2020 for us. I think the next time we're back together, it will be 2021. And we're going to experiment with some live streaming and super chatting next year, and always mashing whatever portion of the matrix needs a good, maybe we'll be smashing instead. Like, right, what do they say? Smash that like button, right? Smashing. I don't know. So awesome, Robert. It's I think this was our second full year of doing this. I think we've been doing it for like 2.5 years now or something like that. But we've been doing shows together for like 5 years now, and always one of my favorite experiences. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's always great to hang out with you and chat with you, and people really seem to like what we do, and so it's all good.
Happy holidays to our fans out there. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah if that's you, and a Happy New Year. And we'll be back to keep you entertained and amused, and hopefully somewhat enlightened.
Whatever timeline you're on, whatever timeline
we're on. Yeah. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Take care. All right.